joins us. Plus, as Mike Ashley offers 50 million quid to rescue Sir Philip Green's ailing Topshop, we'll speak to the former boss of the Arcadia Group, Lord Stuart Rose.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
Very good morning to you. It all started in Leicester, this experiment. What was then called a hopefully short extended lockdown for a few months became many, many more weeks of measures. And back then it was the whack-a-mole strategy, what Boris Johnson called part of the solution as we go forward will be responding with local responses. So if there's a flare-up in a particular part of the country, we will be doing whack-a-mole, the Prime Minister announced. Unfortunately, it didn't work. Because then came the first round of tiers. Boris Johnson saying, we are going to turn round the virus with a local and regional approach. It can drive down the virus and will drive down the virus, he said. It did not. Sir Keir Starmer then thought a circuit breaker lockdown for 2 weeks was required. The Prime Minister said no, accused him of wanting to turn out the lights before reaching for the dimmer switch himself to plunge us into darkness for a month. Now the lights have come back on, only to daze and stun a worryingly large part of the Conservative Party. Around 70 MPs are set to vote down the new rules, prompting the Prime Minister into yet another rethink. This time, the suggestion is that the Tier 3 will definitely end in February, with reviews every 2 weeks, and another meaningful vote in January. Will that be enough to persuade rebellious MPs? Or do you think they should still vote these tiers down? If they do, what comes next? If not tiers, then what? 0345 6060 973 is the number, 84850 to text. You can tweet at LBC. Let's get straight into it this morning. Greg Clark joins us, Chair of the Science and Technology Committee, former Business Secretary, Conservative MP for Tunbridge Wells. Thank you very much for being on the line for us this morning, Mr Clark. Specifically, your part of Kent is one that I think has gone from a Tier 1 to a Tier 3. Do you understand why?
It's because it's been lumped in with the whole of Kent. A decision has been taken to have Kent, which is a vast county, nearly 2 million people, with very different experiences of COVID, treated uniformly. Now, just to give an example of this, in my constituency, Tunbridge Wells, where I'm speaking from, we have a rate that is half the national average. It's about 87 cases per 100,000 per week. That's actually getting down to the levels that Cornwall and the Isle of Wight have to be in Tier 1. And yet we're in Tier 3, the harshest that there is across the country. Now, it's true to say that in the north of the county, by the Thames Estuary, places like Swale and Thanet have very high levels, about 500 per 100,000. But anyone that knows Kent, and many of your listeners will be in Kent, will know that in such a big county, there are very different ways that communities interact with each other. People in Tunbridge Wells go up and down to London, across the border to East Sussex. People in the north tend to go in between the Medway towns and move around in that area. So it's perfectly possible to have a strategy that reflects the science and has restrictions that are proportionate to the level of risk.
Well, the Cabinet Minister, Michael Gove, wrote quite passionately in the papers yesterday saying you've got to do the right thing by the country. You've got to take your medicine. You've got to live with this now because this is how we're having to manage it. Why won't you do what's right for Britain, even if it means that for your own area it's a bit tricky?
Of course we will do what's right for Britain. Of course, every constituent of mine accepts the need to do that. Right throughout the pandemic, the whole country has, I think, behaved responsibly, recognising what is needed to suppress the virus. But people know what the reality is.
But if they had done and respected the rules, then places like Swale and Thanet wouldn't be having some of the highest rates in the country.
Well, we don't know that it comes from not respecting the rules. The virus is very virulent, as we know, and I think it would be wrong to infer that where you've got a high rate of the virus, it means that people have been disregarding the rules.
What else could it be?
Well, the fact is that the rules may not have been, and the application of the measures may have not been enough to catch them. For example, the testing capacity and the way of tracing contacts, as we know, we talked on your programme, has not been good enough, frankly. People have been, through no fault of their own, going around with the virus. They haven't been tested and had the results in time, and their contacts haven't been traced. They shouldn't be blamed for inadvertently being spreaders of infection if they had no way of knowing that. So it's the wrong approach to blame people. But the point I was making, Tom, is that people across the country, including in my constituency, look at the figures, they follow the news, they're very engaged with this. And when they read that the latest figures are that we have 87 cases per 100,000, and that's been falling for weeks now, then they perfectly reasonably say, well, of course, if we were experiencing a very high level of infection, of course we should be in the higher tier, but we're not, so we shouldn't.
Were you planning to vote this down? And I wonder whether, if you were, what you read this morning about what it is Boris Johnson is offering to Conservative MPs as sort of safeguards against this persuades you round.
Yes, I can't support a proposal that very unfairly takes an area with such a very low comparative level of infection and puts it in a category that's the very highest in the country. Obviously, the affected MPs are going to meet with Matt Hancock, but we haven't heard an explanation for why this should be necessary. As I say, it's perfectly possible to identify areas of relatively low infection and to have a tier reflecting that. And areas of high infection. This talk
we want to see
the evidence.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Clark, but this talk of extra votes or sunset clauses, or by February the 3rd we'll be in a different position. They could go. You could have a vote in January to make sure that you can vote these measures down if you don't like them. That doesn't persuade you, no?
Well, the first thing is February is a long time away. This seems for my constituents who feel that this is not just an injustice that's been perpetrated, but is hitting the livelihoods of people, pubs, restaurant owners who could perfectly reasonably be making their living, and for which this is inappropriate. To say February is when it's going to change, I don't think is going to persuade them. And secondly, the Prime Minister has said that there's the possibility of a review of which tier places are in within a couple of weeks from them coming in. But it's not clear that it's possible to have a more forensic and local approach. And that's what we need in Kent. So when I meet Matt Hancock, I want to have answers to those questions.
The government talk about their 5 criteria that they're using to try and distinguish what areas should be in what tier. That's not just cases per 100,000, it's also hospital capacity. I know that there are colleagues of yours, MP, for instance, Laura Trott in Sevenoaks, who says actually hospital capacity is running pretty high across Kent. That is part of the reason why she accepts Sevenoaks has to be in tier 3. Why do you think it is, though, that the government cannot do a much more localised approach? Again, self-interestedly, I'm just up the road from you in Kent, in Tunbridge. We have had 5 cases over the course of the last week, and yet we're basically on full lockdown. Why do you think it is the government cannot do a much more localised response?
Well, it can. We have the information by borough, by district. If it were the case that there was an almost kind of random pattern across Kent, and you had one borough with a very high level of infection next to another with very low, and then it changed again next door to that, then one could understand the preference for uniformity. But what we see very clearly is that the boroughs in the north of the county have a certain pattern of infection that reflects the way that those communities interact with each other. And where we are in the south and in the west, most of our interaction is with East Sussex over the border and up and down to London. And not surprisingly, we have a different pattern of infection. So it's perfectly possible to do it in this way. In fact, it has been done in this way elsewhere, because if you look to Berkshire, the county of Berkshire, then the town of Slough is in a different tier from the rest of the county, reflecting the fact that its experience of COVID is different.
I wonder then whether you think when this comes to a vote, at the moment, as we stand this morning, the government is set to lose.
Well, we don't know that. We don't know what the opposition parties are going to do.
Because if they do lose, just finally, sorry, Mr. Clark, if the government does lose, what is it that you're expecting them to do after that? Is tears or what?
Well, the government will clearly need to come back with a proposal that can command a majority in the House of Commons. That's evident. But I hope before that they will be able to answer some of the questions as to the either the justification for this approach, which I don't see, or to give some assurance that it really is going to change and to allow places that really have no reason to be under these level of restrictions to be at a more appropriate level.
Okay. Greg Clark, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. You're chair of the Science and Technology Committee, former Business Secretary, Conservative MP for Tunbridge Wells. Disgusted of Tunbridge Wells, I think it's fair to say this morning. And it's not just because it's self-interested, because I happen to live in Kent, an area that was Tier 1, that is now Tier 3. But this approach that the government has taken of dropping the net over the country is a mile away, isn't it, from the whack-a-mole strategy that Boris Johnson was talking about a few months ago. Why is that the case? Why is the government not in a position to be much more targeted, more nuanced, more localised with this approach? Otherwise, there are people who have followed the rules, who have abided by what the government has been asking them to do, sometimes quite draconian and restrictive, and yet are finding themselves in the top tier and unable to open their businesses or go about their day-to-day life. 0345 6060 973. Do you think MPs should vote these new restrictions down? We'll speak to the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, in just a few moments. Tom Swarbrick here, 1016.
LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster on LBC.
Morning to you, 10:19 is the time. Tom Swarbrick with you here on LBC. Hope we find you very well this Sunday morning. Look, we're talking about the vote that's coming in the House of Commons on these tier measures. Boris Johnson worried enough about the result, seemingly, to put in some extra provisions to help those angered Conservative MPs come to the conclusion that they're better off voting with the government this time, suggesting that there will be a sunset clause on some of these restrictions by the 3rd of February. So in the month of February, we could see the restrictions start to fall away. Well, that's very dependent on whether or not people follow the rules, isn't it? That there would be a review of them every 2 weeks, that those of us in Tier 3 or in Tier 2 can move down from those tiers from the 16th of December, and that at the end of January there would be another vote on the tiers about whether to extend them till the end of March. You'll remember Rishi Sunak came out quite early to say that the furlough scheme was going to carry on until the end of March, giving us an indication that these, and let's call them for what they are, they're lockdown measures. I mean, they're lockdown with a couple more shops open. But other than that, this is lockdown by a different name, isn't it? 0345 6060 973 is my number. We'll speak to the Foreign Secretary in just a moment. Let's get Marcus in Norwich on the radio this morning. Hi, Marcus.
Morning, how are you?
Yeah, good. Tell us about the tiers.
Yeah, no, I own a pub and some other hospitality businesses in Norwich, and I thought it'd just be good to sort of express our frustrations and tell you a little bit of how it really does affect people. We made absolute sacrifices in the hospitality industry since March, consistently told that we had to do this because there's not enough capacity in our local hospitals to deal with the people affected by this. We're now coming into December. We live in Norwich. There's no Nightingale hospital being set up locally around here. The local hospitals aren't overrun. But yet again, we're told that we've got to make these huge sacrifices that cost our businesses so much.
Do you know, Marcus, I'm really interested in what Michael Gove said yesterday about the NHS, including newly constructed Nightingale hospitals, could be, to use his words, physically overwhelmed by the number of cases coming through the doors. The Nightingales aren't even open.
We haven't even got one. So they've had months and months and months to train volunteers. We've got buildings locally that could be perfect. Could have 1,000 beds ready, but there's nothing. Nothing's been done at all locally. So we're now in this position that we get these politicians who get fantastic salaries, secured employment, big pensions, all these scientists telling us that we've got to make these sacrifices. So once again, we've got all of these hospitality businesses all across the country absolutely shot to pieces.
How long can you last for?
Well, so what do we do? So they give us money that we can borrow. So then we know that we've got to pay that back. So that's just a joke in itself. One of my businesses, my main business, my fixed overhead's probably £12,000-14,000 a month. Can't change that. I get, I think, £3,000 a month to survive on. I've got the hospitality industry employees, some of the staff that aren't on the best pay. They're expected, so they're already on minimum wage, and they're expected to last months and months and months with 20% pay cuts.
Well, listen, Marcus, my programme in the week, late night show with Tom Swarbrick, 10 p.m. Monday to Thursday on LBC, is the unofficial home of the publican. We talk about pubs, we talk about the pub trade a lot because it has been so badly impacted by this. We'll get the boss of Wetherspoons on later, so you'll hear from Tim Martin too about the impact on his businesses. Marcus, thank you. I wish you the best of luck. 0345 6060 973 is my number. Text here, Tom, everyone thinks they're an exception. Well, possibly, but if you followed the rules, if you have case numbers going down, if you've got extra hospital capacity in the form of some of these Nightingale hospitals and other parts of the NHS, why is it that if you're in Tier 1, you've gone to Tier 3? It makes no sense. David's in Hammersmith. Hi, David.
Hiya. So I think the government is right to do this because of people going across borders and things like that. They can't control that. And it's a bit like seeing people who are saying, complaining about losing weight, but then stuffing themselves with pork scratchings every 3 weeks. So they go on a diet and they cheat on the diet. Then they complain because the diet has to be more severely imposed. The fact is that... Hang on,
in your analogy, who's done the eating? Because
do you not know people who've cheated in this lockdown? honestly.
I know some people who haven't followed the rules. I see some people who haven't followed the rules. But David, to look at it overall, hang on a sec. No, I'm not taking this, because this blames me, my community, my family for being in tier 3 when we've been in tier 1. We've got cases falling over the last lockdown.
Yes, I hear that, but if we all have a selfish approach, we'll never get through this. The MPs, this is the reason
it's
I
not
call
selfish.
This.
It's not. I'm sorry, but it's not selfish to want to see a logical, thought-through system that's put in place.
I have members of my family losing a 35-year business because made half their staff redundant. 25% of what's left, or half of what's left, are on furlough, and they've got to somehow trade their way out on 5% margins when it all is finished. I'm not immune to this, but the fact is that if you go stricter now, the numbers go lower, so you've got a longer period then. Otherwise, you'll just face another lockdown in 2 or 3 months'
So why
time.
are we doing Christmas then? Why are we opening up at Christmas for 5 days?
I agree. I don't think we should have opened up at Christmas. I think we should have had a tighter now and then release. But the fact is that the MPs are making themselves look disunited. They're actually gifting Labour, who are on the sidelines, looking as if they're organised because they're just saying stuff. They're not actually having to do anything. But really, what these MPs are doing is just making a party look disunited. Now, as somebody who's been, involved in politics for years, you'll know that a disunited party isn't one that's popular. And the fact is that it's better to lock down. I'd have gone even for a stricter lockdown till Christmas and then had a couple of days. But the fact is that the government can never be accepted to have allowed death. That's the thing people don't seem to understand. Politically, they will never be able to. Somebody says, "My gran died because of you." Yeah, and they can. With the first lockdown, they can plead ignorance. They can say unprecedented, but they can't have a deliberate policy that says, go ahead, we're going to do the Swedish model, because then they will be directly responsible for the deaths.
I don't know that it's fair to look at Sweden as a country that hasn't had any restrictions at all. It has had people who have been asked to abide by the hands, face space, wear a mask, all that kind of stuff. But David, I don't hang on a sec, sir. I don't mind restrictions as long as they're appropriate for the various different external factors that go into making these decisions, whether it's hospitals or cases per 100,000 or the way people are moving around. Listen, thank you so much for your call. It's 10:27. I want to tell you what's on the front pages of some of your papers this Sunday morning before we come to the Foreign Secretary. The Mail on Sunday. As Boris offers rebel MPs chance to kill off COVID tears in 9 weeks, he makes an impassioned and colourful plea. Let's not trip on last barbed wire. This is the Prime Minister writing exclusively inside that paper, making all kinds of reference to war again. The Sunday Express, PM's promise to MPs over virus rules. Tears could end in 9 weeks as Boris attempts to stop lockdown rebellion. Front page picture of Kate Middleton as she launches her Nurturing Childhood Years campaign. lbc.co.uk, lbc.co.uk. PM offers Tory rebels February the 3rd sunset. For COVID tier system, you can get all the details there. Sunday Times this morning, Johnson in retreat as Tory revolt. Over these tiers, rocked number 10. PM hints at looser restrictions for millions. Whole country lockdowns could be scrapped, they say. Let's pause that review as I'm joined live by Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, First Secretary of State and Conservative MP for Esher and Walton. Thank you very much for being there for us this morning, Foreign Secretary. Let's talk about these tiers first of all, and the comments from your Cabinet colleague Michael Gove, who says the NHS is going to be physically overwhelmed, or could have been physically overwhelmed. Can you tell us what extra protections have been put in to the NHS that weren't there in March that are now there to protect it?
Well, thanks, Tom. And look, Michael Gove is right to warn about the risk to the NHS through the winter months. There's a whole string of financial support. There's the learning that we've got from the virus, so the precautionary steps we take, the testing of NHS workers, the PPE that's there. But the bottom line in relation to the tiering approach is that there are 5 principles or 5 criteria: the prevalence of the virus, the prevalence amidst the over 60s, who are the most vulnerable, the R rate, the positive testing rate, and then also those pressures on the NHS. Mm-hmm. So we've got to take a rounded approach in relation to those for each of those localities affected.
You've talked about the additional protections put into the NHS since March. Those have been needed, of course, to deal with this. One of those is the Nightingales. if we're looking at locking the country up in certain areas again to protect the NHS, why aren't the Nightingales being used?
Well, the Nightingales are always available, and before they were used less for COVID and more for the spillover. But the truth is, the best way, we've equipped the NHS. The NHS has got the capacity to cope, but we've always got to make sure that the virus doesn't expand and grow and spike so it overwhelms the NHS. And of course, the challenges and the pressure on the NHS during the winter months are greater. So that's the cautionary note. But I understand
that. Everyone understands that the NHS goes through a difficult time at winter, but either it's protected or it isn't. You've got the Nightingales that are sitting there ready to go. There are some of your colleagues, and the chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood, says that there are 2,000 medically trained soldiers who could be used at any given moment to try and help in there. It feels, in the first part of this crisis in March, protecting the NHS was understandable. Should there not be greater protection for the NHS to deal with COVID in the 9 months that have followed?
Yes, but I don't quite accept your premise that either it's protected or it isn't. There are measures that we take, not just in terms of supplying the NHS with the resource and the capacity, but also making sure that the demands on it from the virus are not overwhelming. That's the point of the tiered approach. So we would rather start from a position of confidence and strength with more restrictive tiered approach with review dates every 2 weeks to allow, as I say, from a position of confidence to responsibly ease up and allow areas to go through the tiers and to relax, rather than start with a lower level and risk the spike, which would send them back into higher levels or indeed back into a national lockdown. And I think,
like the last tiered approach.
Yeah, of course, we're learning as we go. And the aim here, the exit strategy, is to get out of wholesale all of the particularly intrusive levels of restrictions that we've got, whether it's under a national lockdown or a tiered approach, by the spring, which we can do if we get the the vaccine disseminated across the most at-risk levels of our society and community, but also key workers. So we think by the spring, subject to the regulatory approvals around the vaccine, we think we'll be in a much better place. The approach we're taking now is bridging us to that point, which is why we just need to be careful that we don't allow an uptick in areas where we've seen high levels in the past.
Sure. So if we just finally on this, we need to be very, very careful. We don't want to see an uptick. We need people to follow the rules. Why on earth are we opening up for 5 days over Christmas?
Well, one of the reasons we can do that is because we are taking a more restricted approach and to do so from a position of confidence. But I think, frankly, the 5 day window over Christmas is a recognition not just of the physical and economic impact of this virus, but also the emotional, the spiritual, the moral sense that families do need to come together and be able to do so, again, under conditions that have never applied previously to a Christmas. And people do feel that they want to be able to get together with their loved ones. And I think you have to take into account that human element, and that's what the government's doing.
Let me ask you about fish. Hopefully this may be the week. This may be the week in which we get a Brexit deal, but you never know. The time seems to slip on it. Is it really the case that it's going to be the patrolling and the amount of fish that can be fished in British waters that is going to scupper this whole deal?
You'd think, Tom, that it wouldn't because of the wider equities economically and otherwise at stake. But I don't think it's unreasonable for the British government, given the commitments that we've made, and as we leave the EU as an independent coastal state, to say that just like any other member of the international community, any other independent nation, we have control over our fisheries, the fisheries in our waters. If that point of principle is accepted by the EU, of course we want to be pragmatic. We understand the need for transition in relation to quotas. We understand the equities for France and other nations with fishing communities. But I think the EU have got to accept that point of principle that as an independent coastal state, we have control over our own fisheries. And insisting that we can only have control over 18% of the fish within those waters is not, I think, consistent with that.
So unless they move, it's no deal?
I think we need to see some flexibility, some pragmatism on their side, and also recognition of the economic interest on the EU side, because of course if we left the EU and we don't see further arrangements in place under a Canada-style deal, we'll thrive, we'll make a success of it under Australian-style rules. Well, but European fishermen and the European fishing industry will not have any access secured through a deal to UK waters. So it doesn't seem to me that serves their interests either.
Let me ask you two very quick questions to finish. I'd love to ask you more about foreign aid, but I think we'll run out of time. Let me ask you very quickly about Iran. There's been an assassination of an Iranian nuclear scientist over the last couple of days. Iran blames Israel. Is it the case that the British government wants the US to re-sign the old Iranian nuclear deal, or is there going to be something new that the E3 plus America can insist on to bring Iran to the table?
Yes, just on the reports from Iran, we're still ascertaining the facts. Obviously, as a matter of international law, the UK has always said, as a result of, as a consequence of international humanitarian law, that there should be, as a point of principle, no targeting of civilians. More generally, we are working, and I've met with my European counterparts this week, from my French and German opposite numbers in Berlin. We do want, and we've remained advocates of the JCPOA. The incoming Biden administration have made clear that they are interested in signing up to it and indeed increasing and reinforcing it. And I think we want to work to de-escalate tensions and to get Iran back to full compliance. Let's also just be clear, Iran has systematically failed to live up to its obligations under the JCPOA. It is in the very precarious position economically because of those choices. We need to hold Iran to account, but we also need a pathway, the door ajar, for diplomacy back to a deal that restrains it better than it has to date.
So you might need a tougher, sort of new in that sense, Iran deal. Just before I let you go, I can hear the car beeping into position. Before I do, just to get your thoughts on a horrendous story inside one of the papers this morning. A decision to release child killer Marrade Philpott from prison after serving just half of her sentence apparently makes a mockery of British justice, according to, in fact, some of your colleagues. I wonder if you think it is right. And being in a Conservative government that wants to be tougher on law and order, that someone who killed her own children is freed after just 8 years, less than half of her sentence.
Yes, look, a very serious case. We take a very robust approach. Both Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, Rob Buckland, Justice Secretary, bringing through reforms to make sure that there is even more robust and rigorous. I will, if you don't mind, not interfere in the legal process in relation to individual cases, but we are concerned to make sure both the severity and the moral gravity in those very, very serious cases, not to mention the public safety, is respected. And I will, of course, want the Justice Secretary
and the Home
Secretary to look at individual cases.
Sorry, it does worry you that, though, just finally. It worries you that this decision has been made. However it's been made, and I'm not going to try and barrack you into a position where you have to override some of the legal principles that might be underpinning it, but that it does worry you, right?
I take the most robust approach in cases like this, but what I'm not going to do is impugn a legal process, not least because it could undermine the very protections I want to see enforced.
Dominic Raab, really grateful for your time. Thank you very much indeed. Foreign Secretary, First Secretary of State, Conservative MP for Esher and Walton on the programme this morning. Come to more of your thoughts on that, particularly on the tiered system in just a few moments. We'll also speak to SAGE too. Susan Michie, Professor of Health Psychology, will join us as well. Tom Swarbrick on LBC. It's 10:37. Late for the news headlines. Here's Philip Chrysakos.
Boris Johnson has written to his Conservative MPs to try to head off a Commons rebellion over England's coronavirus restrictions. Ahead of voting on the measures on Tuesday, the Prime Minister is offering Parliament another chance to vote in January, saying the legislation will have a sunset of February the 3rd. The Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police is defending the use of stop and search, claiming black youths are 9 times more likely to be murdered than white youths. Cressida Dick, who is also the UK's most senior police officer, tells the Sunday Times the increased use of the policing tactic is warranted because it's helping to save young lives, particularly from knife crime. David Prowse, who played Darth Vader in the original Star Wars trilogy, has died at the age of 85. He also earned an MBE for playing the Green Cross Code Man, a superhero promoting road safety to a generation of children in the 1970s. The weather, dull, grey and misty for many through today, although there will be sunny spells across the southwest of England, northeast of Scotland and parts of West Wales, a high of 8 degrees.
The fight against coronavirus. For the very latest, stay with LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Text 84850.
Come to more of your thoughts on the tiered system in just a few secs. John, you're going to be next on the radio about it, but we curtailed our paper review in order to allow Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, on the programme this morning. Let me just run through it finally, because the Sunday Mirror has an exclusive on their front page. The Recruiter, they track down the fanatic who persuaded dozens to join terror group. His brother was killed by a drone strike, the paper says, and he blames him for radicalisation. They also, in that paper, have the story of Marrade Philpott, the child killer mum who is going to be freed out after 8 years. That is less than half her sentence. Interesting, some of the comments from Dominic Raab about that particular case too. The Observer, angry Tory MPs turn on Gove after overwhelmed NHS claims. Boris Johnson facing growing Tory mutiny over new COVID-19 restrictions last night. Furious MPs accused the government of exaggerating capacity problems in the NHS in an attempt to win their support. And the Sunday Telegraph, finally, virus tears could end in 9 weeks. Boris Johnson forced to give Parliament a vote in bid to head off mass Tory rebellion. They also talk about the idea of how a no-deal Brexit is apparently underpriced, according to sources in Number 10. Talk about that after the news at 11, and whether or not within the coronavirus difficulties we are seeing in the economy, what we need on top of that is a no-deal Brexit. John's been waiting patiently. Hi there, John.
Good morning, Tom. How are you?
Very well, sir, if not a little frustrated. Yourself?
Sitting in Stamford, which is like being in jail.
Good.
Stamford has one road out into its designated Tier 3 area to the east in South Kesteven. It is surrounded by Tier 2 Rutland, Tier 2 Northampton, and Tier 2 Cambridgeshire. As compared with Hackney, which had 420 new cases to the 27th of November, South Kesteven only had 244 new cases.
But John, there's no, as I discussed with the Conservative MP and the Foreign Secretary, it's not just about cases per 100,000. It's about hospital capacity. It's about NHS staff. It's all a load of other things that mean that you have to stay in that particular tier.
Well, it may do, but I wanted to tell you how ridiculous this is, because people who live about a mile down the road, in fact, the people who live on the other side of the road from me, which is Burley, have to go to Ketton or to Peterborough to do their shopping. They cannot come into Stamford because you're not allowed to go for non-essential purposes from Zone 2 into Zone 3. And if anybody sat down and worked it out, if everybody was completely law-abiding, this town is a jail. This cannot have been right. People have not thought this out properly. And if it's because there are not enough hospital places, people should be asking themselves what on earth the Tories have been doing for the last 10 years.
Well, do you know what, John? I put it again to the Foreign Secretary about the Nightingale hospitals, why it is that if NHS capacity is a concern, and of course it is, why it is that they're not open, and the answer came back. But listen, I think there will be lots of people listening to you, John, who say, oh, for God's sake, just suck it up, man. You know, you've got to do it for the country. It's not really that much of an imposition being asked to stay at home for a bit, is it?
Well, I fully understand. We do. I'm in isolation. That's why I came to Stamford. But the point is, if you have a policy that's just idiotic, you've got to make it intelligent for people to respect it. And what I'm saying is that people are simply going to disregard a ridiculous policy.
Intelligent idiocy. John, thank you very much. No, you're welcome. Thank you to you. Let's get to Peter in Folkestone very quickly. Hi there, Peter.
Hi, Tom. It's fuming of Folkestone. We had our district area, Folkestone and Hythe. We had a rate of 180, and that's the highest it's been since ever over the last couple of weeks.
And that was in lockdown.
Less than half of any sort of comparable Tier 3 area, and yet we're in Tier 3. So,
what do you want MPs to do then, Peter? What do you want MPs to do? If they vote it down, I'm not sure what comes after it, to be honest. I don't know what happens then.
I would like MPs to remember that the National Health Service is meant to be a service we, the population, have now been trying to protect, unsuccessfully apparently, the National Health Service for the last 8 to 9 months. What else can we do, Tom?
Listen, I think that question comes with an awful lot of emotional and political baggage, but asking the question about how much longer do we need to protect the NHS in this manner is not an unfair one to ask at this time, I don't think. Peter, thank you. 0345 6060 973, my number. What are Labour going to do both on the vote for tiers but also on a potential Brexit deal? We'll speak to their Shadow Transport Secretary in just a few moments. Tom Swarbrick here, 10:48.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast, LBC.
Chancellor Rishi Sunak, nobody expected you to get it right in March. Chancellor, respectfully, you've had 8 months to redo the sums. Why are 3 million people still excluded?
Respectfully disagree with the sense that 3 million people have not been able to access any help.
But to those who pay through a dividend, which is a totally legal and tax-efficient fashion, they've been left behind again, Chancellor.
Those people also pay themselves through their company in PayYE. I don't think it's fair to say that there isn't support available.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast, weekday mornings from 7, LBC.
technology.
This is LBC Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster.
So as the arguments rumble on about this tier system, we know that it's going to be suspended for 5 days over Christmas to allow you to travel up and down the country, regardless of what tier you're in, to go and spend 5 days with family members. The Labour Party are asking for much more to be done to make travel safe over that period of time. Jim McMahon joins us, Shadow Transport Secretary, Labour MP for Oldham West and Royton. Thank you for coming on the programme this morning. What is it that you would like to see the government do to make particularly train travel safe over this Christmas?
Well, we're asking the government to have a plan in place to accommodate for what we almost certainly expect in terms of people wanting to visit family members over the Christmas and New Year period. And so where we know that demand will increase, and obviously rail usage at the moment is very low, we do need to make sure the government are taking that into account. And so the two areas that we focused on, the first one is engineering works and making sure that there are engineering works taking place that mean that bottlenecks can be created or even that demand is concertinaed and the impact then that have about frontline worker safety and passenger safety. The second area that we've asked them to look at is on the use of peak and off-peak tickets. Now, at the moment, there isn't really a peak time for trains because the kind of business, the commuter traffic just isn't there on our railways. And so what we do see is a bottleneck naturally that gets created with the last off-peak train and the first off-peak train, where people, of course, are buying the cheaper ticket because that's also affordable, but more people are doing that, and then you're creating that unnecessary bottleneck. And so we're asking them to review the peak and off-peak tickets as well.
Does Labour support the opening up over the 5 days of Christmas?
Yeah, I think we recognise that people have sacrificed a lot. People have had to live under restrictions for quite a long time. Here in Oldham, we've been in one form of restrictions or another for the best part of half a year. And people, I think, do want to know that the end is coming. Now, there's a balance, isn't there? Because, of course, we are not out of the woods. The virus very much is amongst us. And we need to make sure that we do all that we can to control the spread of that virus. But I think giving people a period to see the loved ones after such a sacrifice and such a long period is the right thing to do to maintain public support. And then obviously in the new year, we'll have to look at what restrictions are required then.
Yes, a possible New Year lockdown might be on the cards if the virus gets more out of control as these measures are lifted. Do you suspect that you and your colleagues in the Labour Party will vote for these tier restrictions when they come before the House of Commons?
Well, we haven't seen the detail of them just yet. Obviously, there was a letter that was sent out last night from Boris Johnson that kind of outlines a framework of what might be presented. Yeah. But we haven't seen the detail yet of what actually will come to Parliament. And so there are meetings that are taking place tomorrow with our front bench, with Keir Starmer and with the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Scientific Advisor. And that will form the evidence base and inform our position. But I think outside of that, where the public health intervention is really important, the government still have time to come forward with an enhanced financial support package. We still see many areas in Tier 3 that aren't given the business support package that they need to make sure that we can protect jobs in the medium term. Still seeing 3 million people that are excluded from any support at all.
So it'd be you could make your support, conditional on those 3 million getting some more help, do you think?
Well, essentially, we need to have restrictions in place because if the legislation doesn't go through, it's not between Boris Johnson's tiered system and Labour's deal. Our deal won't be on the table in that sense. It'll be between what Boris Johnson brings or no restrictions at all. And we recognise as a responsible opposition, we've agreed that we'd work in the national interest, that we've got to support the government on public health interventions. What we're saying, though, is the government just can't take that for granted and believe that our support will always be there, particularly when they have a growing rebellion on their side. And so really listen to the legitimate concerns that are being raised about support to self-isolate, about improving track, trace and isolate, about making sure that small businesses are supported, particularly in areas where we know they've been very seriously affected, like hospitality, to make sure that we kind of come through this virus together, because our economic success will be predicated by and large on what foundation will be in place after the virus, and our small and medium businesses are critical to that.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you very finally then about what Labour is thinking of doing on any Brexit deal. The difficulties that the party got into before the last general election. To what standards is Labour going to hold any trade deal to?
Well, first of all, we haven't seen the details, so it's very difficult to form a view about what we're likely to vote on. But we can talk about principles. And the principles that we have is, first of all, we need to make sure that we meet our international obligations, and that means that we should not be breaking international law under any circumstances. We need to make sure that whatever agreement is in place resolves the issue of Northern Ireland, because what we can't have is a deal that comes forward that potentially risks peace in Northern Ireland. That's very fragile. We also need to make sure that there's clarity for business on tariffs, on standards in particular, to make sure that our businesses can transition to whatever new relationship is in the smoothest possible way. And we need to make sure then that mitigation is in place. And so the government needs to do far more to reassure us that they have got proper plans in place to deal with incoming goods in particular.
They haven't got long. I mean, they haven't got long to reassure you. They haven't got long to get a deal together before the end of the year. Do you think you're... Yeah, well, Keir Starmer had his 6 tests when he was Brexit Secretary of the Withdrawal Agreement. It sounds to me like you've got sort of 4 sort of similar tests at least there for this trade deal. But you could, I guess, envisage a scenario in which Labour, votes this down?
I mean, it'd be difficult to see that scenario, because if we were to vote down this deal, again, it's not between Boris Johnson's deal and Labour's deal or any other deal. It's between this deal or no deal. And we are very clear that no deal was to cause such economic harm to our country. That wouldn't be a road that we choose to take down. It's really important that we pull together. So really,
it's a blank check then, isn't it? I mean, if you're caught in the trap of you can't vote it down because you go to no deal, and therefore you can't not vote for it, regardless of whether or not it matches your targets.
But there's still a very important role for us to play in making sure that the deal that does come forward gets the proper scrutiny, that we make sure that the areas of concern that we do have are properly looked into, and that, hopefully the government recognise that this relying on a majority in the House of Parliament where you can do as you please just isn't good enough on these big issues. What we need to do is to work together in the national interest to try and reach agreement and consensus where possible. And that requires sharing of information and also a genuine dialogue where the concerns that we have, which by the way, they are not artificial concerns, these are very real concerns.
No.
That will affect our country. We just want to work through them.
There will be Conservative MPs and MPs across the House who share those concerns. Jim, thank you. Jim McMahon, Shadow Transport Secretary, Labour MP for Oldham West and Royton. Keep your calls coming in on the tier system. I want to turn attention to the hospitality sector, pubs and clubs fearing for their future. You'll hear from the boss of Wetherspoons after the news at 11 o'clock on what he fears is going to happen to his trade. The British Beer and Pub Association saying hundreds of pubs could well go to the wall now.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 11 o'clock, the Foreign Secretary isn't ruling out if England's coronavirus tier system will end in 9 weeks' time. Dominic Raab has been speaking to Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC after Boris Johnson said the rules will have a sunset expiry date of the 3rd of February ahead of a Commons vote on Tuesday.
The aim here is to get out of wholesale all of the particularly intrusive levels of restrictions that we've got, whether it's under a national lockdown or a tiered approach, by the spring, which we can do if we get the vaccine disseminated across the most at-risk levels of our society and community, but also key workers.
But Greg Clark, who is the chair of the Science and Technology Committee and is also the Conservative MP for Tunbridge Wells in Kent, has told Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC that a blanket tier for counties like Kent don't make sense, and he'll be putting his concerns to the Health Secretary.
The Prime Minister has said that there's the possibility of a review of which tier places are in within a couple of weeks from them coming in. But it's not clear that it's possible to have a more forensic and local approach. And that's what we need in Kent. So when I meet Matt Hancock, I want to have answers to those questions.
In other headlines this hour, the UK's most senior police officer is defending stop and search, saying it's saving lives despite it being used disproportionately against black people. Metropolitan Police Commissioner Dame Cressida Dick says black youths in London are 9 times more likely to be murdered than those who are white. The Foreign Secretary says fishing rights remain an outstanding major bone of contention tension in post-Brexit trade talks with the European Union. Dominic Raab has told Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC that fishing is a point of principle and that the UK is a coastal state, so must be able to control our own waters. The Scottish Government says it hasn't closed the door on handing over legal advice about its unlawful investigation of Alex Salmond. Deputy First Minister John Swinney goes on to say the matter is still under active consideration, adding the Scottish Government is working as swiftly as it can to address the issue. People across the UK are being invited to plant a tree for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee to help mark the monarch's 70-year reign in 2022. The tree planting campaign, known as the Queen's Green Canopy, will begin next year ahead of that milestone. David Prowse, who played Darth Vader in the original Star Wars trilogy, has died at the age of 85. The former bodyguard was cast in the role, which was voiced by James Earl Jones. David Prowse was also the superhero, the Green Cross Codeman, promoting road safety in the UK to a generation of children during the 1970s. The weather, dull, grey and misty for many throughout today, although north-east Scotland will see some sunny spells with longer spells of sunshine over parts of West Wales and south-west England, a high of 8 degrees. From Global's newsroom, I'm Philip Chrysakos.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
Very good morning to you. Just gone 11 o'clock. You're listening to and possibly even watching Swarbrick on Sunday here on LBC, where, of course, you can get us not just on LBC, but on our YouTube video, on our YouTube platform, on Twitter, on Facebook, on the app. The all-out assault on your Sunday senses continues this morning. I want to turn to talk about business for the next hour, and particularly not just when it comes to the difficulties of certain specific businesses. We'll talk about the Arcadia Group in just a few moments. They're in real trouble now. We'll speak to the former CEO of the Arcadia Group about whether or not a rescue deal can come down the line, but about other parts of the economy, particularly the hospitality sector, so struggling under the coronavirus restrictions. The pubs that can't open, and even if they can open, you've got to serve a substantial meal with a pint. You can't just go in and get one, despite them being COVID secure, many of them. But also whether or not the threat of a no-deal Brexit is playing into your planning for next year. If you run a business, how much are you having to change what you're doing, or just wringing your hands at the status that we've got at the moment, which is we don't know what is happening in January when it comes to Brexit? Do you think a no-deal Brexit is going to make things worse for your business and the economy struggle more if indeed we find that in a week and maybe a week and a bit's time we haven't actually got anywhere with the EU, and so we're heading out the door without a trading deal? 0345 6060 973 is the number. You can text 84850. You can tweet at LBC. If you're a business who have been asked specifically to get ready for Brexit, what Brexit are you getting ready for? It strikes me that you're having to prepare for an outcome of no deal, where the information is going to be lacking, and an outcome where you don't know what the deal is going to be because we haven't got there yet. How is it that you're preparing for Brexit? Come on to your thoughts in a few moments. We'll speak to Lord Stuart Rose, who not only chaired the Arcadia Group, but was also, of course, briefly the chairman of the Stronger In campaign. First, Tim Martin joins us, founder and chair of Wetherspoons PLC. I wonder, Tim, how bad this new tier system will be for your business.
Well, it's bad for all pub businesses. Nearly half our pubs will be shut. The other half of the pubs won't be operating as pubs. As most listeners will know, a pub is somewhere where you can go in and order a pint, but you won't be able to do that because the government has turned the entire British pubs either into restaurants or shut them. It's rather an amazing situation. But that's really bad because, of course, pubs are geared up for selling beer. And if you suddenly become a quasi-restaurant, you're not really set up for it. And as for being shut, it speaks for itself. So dire, terrible.
But your pubs offer food anyway, right? So they're people can go in and have a nice meal and a pint of beer anyway. What difference does it make if they're open and you can only order a beer when you're ordering food?
Well, Tom, you look like a pretty clean living sort of guy, so you probably don't go out on the sherbet much.
Do you know what, Mr. Martin? That's an unfair slur, sir. I find myself regularly in my Wetherspoons in Tunbridge.
Oh, well, you've got very good taste. But it's the main thing is that for a hell of a lot of the country, going out for a few pints and eating either elsewhere at a restaurant or at home is just the way you live life. So it's a massive change to say you've got to have a substantial meal at the Dog and Duck. It's okay at the groovy Wetherspoons you go to because the food's very good. But even then, a lot of people in Tunbridge, where they're well known for liking a sherbet, want to go out just for a pint or a coffee or whatever. But you now got to have a substantial meal.
But isn't that in your interests? You stand to make more.
No, we won't make more. I mean, it's the half of the town centre is going to be shut, and there are restaurants trading still. The fact of the matter is that going out for a pint, not to have fish and chips with it, is a national pastime. And why shouldn't people go out for a pint? They've never been shut before. It's Lord Sumption's right. This is some of the most draconian legislation or regulations that has been seen in the history of the UK. It's an effrontery and it's ridiculous.
Particularly when pubs across the country have spent so much time and money making themselves as COVID secure as the government have asked to do. The British Beer and Pub Association say that there are 30,000 pubs that are going to become unviable, many potentially hundreds of thousands of jobs to be lost. Do you think that is now inevitable?
It's heading that way. There's the elastic's been stretched to breaking point because you had a 3-month shutdown, then you had reopened with constantly changing regulations, which meant pubs were doing triple backward somersaults to try and stay open. Now pubs, Tom, have been shut completely and they've been turned into restaurants or they're closed. So
and is that true for your pubs as well? Can we see Wetherspoons pubs closed for good, particularly those in Tier 3 if they're there for a long time?
Well, I mean, it doesn't help. We're probably in a better position than most, and we've got some shareholders with deep pockets, but we depend on the economy. A pub company depends on the economy. All businesses in the end depend on the economy. And this bunch of jokers running the government, it's not the Parliament, it's been run under emergency legislation. This bunch of jokers who've never run a business are spending 1 billion quid nearly a day, 6 billion quid a week to subsidise this farce. They even closed damn golf clubs until everyone made them feel so stupid. I mean, how the hell are you going to get COVID from playing golf?
If these are the bunch of jokers, do you think Sir Keir Starmer would make a better leader? Do you think he'd be better at running the country?
Well, he's got his chance, hasn't he? Because he's now in our democratic system. He's got the opportunity now.
Would you vote for him?
With a better set of policies, but he's more for lockdowns than the government, and so is Ed Davey, the guy running the Lib Dems. So we, the people, including LBC, have to convince them that they're on a suicidal path with no health benefits and dire economic benefits.
Well, just on that, finally, you talk about the problems in the economy caused by COVID. Of course, they are massive. But the London School of Economics suggests that actually the cost of a no-deal Brexit would be 2 or 3 times larger than the Bank of England's forecast for the cost of COVID. Are you in a position now, Tim, where you just think, actually, let's get a Brexit deal done to try and salvage the economy and get pubs open?
The London School of Economics are talking utter cobblers. They were part of the cabal, including George Osborne, most economists and others, who said immediately upon voting, Tom, for to leave, there would be a massive crash in the economy.
So and put a no-deal Brexit on top of the economic difficulties caused by COVID. You don't mind?
The no-deal Brexit will be brilliant for the UK because we will be trading free like Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan, Singapore, America, all these successful economies. We do not depend on being behind a tariff barrier set up by the EU for success.
That's Tim Martin, still going fit on a no-deal Brexit, founder and chairman of Wetherspoons. Listening to that at 11 minutes past 11 is Peter Marks, chief executive of the Deltic Group, the UK's largest operator of nightclubs. Thank you very much for coming on the programme this morning, Mr. Marks. I wonder, picking up from what Tim Martin said there, that calling Boris Johnson and his cabinet a bunch of jokers in how they've asked businesses to operate. You've been in particularly bad shape given this coronavirus. I wonder whether you agree with that assessment of them.
Well, I have to, don't I? Because let's be honest, I've not been able to open. And I've had no compensation whatsoever for remaining closed. I've had crumbs off of the king's table, as it were, and we're starving to death. And the fact is that my business is now up for sale because government have refused to give us any help.
Mm. And you haven't been helped by any of the bounce back loans or the CBILS scheme? Nothing has been able to help you. Why?
Well, you need to ask the government that. It's almost like they're having populists and trying to get rid of us, which of course won't be the case, but that's what we feel like it's the case. Sure, we've got the usual furlough, we're all grateful for that, and rates forgiveness and time to pay, but the other 8 or 9 schemes that are out there, we as Deltic have not qualified for one single penny. And yet it's crazy. Why would they want us to shut? We are a very lucrative piece of business for the Treasury, because for every £3 we take, we give £1 back to the Treasury because we pay a lot of duty with the alcohol that we sell, and we employ a lot of people, and those two things make us a really juicy, tasty morsel. So why wouldn't you keep our business alive? We only need 11p in the pound, whereas the French are paying 20 pence in the pound to their hospitality businesses to keep us alive. They've refused. It's crazy.
But you're not suggesting that they try and come up with a set of circumstances that allows you to open, because you face a particularly difficult challenge in making your businesses COVID secure. You're just asking for as much help as you can possibly get up until you are able to allow to open, which is when, do you think?
Well, it's all down of it. I absolutely, first of all, yes, that's where we're at. We don't think that we are going to be opening any day soon. We actually think we're a bit of a political messaging football. If you open nightclubs, then everything's, that's it. We're all over. We're all back to normal. I think that's sort of it. We have had scientists look at us. We do know there's a way back. But actually, we know that the right thing to do right now is to sort of remain shut, but be given money to survive. And frankly, I'm almost in the point now where it's too late. And I can't see how Deltic can survive now, which is crazy. We're the largest operator of specialist nightclubs in the country. We've got 50 odd sites all around the country, and goodness knows what our future's like. I've got to try and persuade a new set of investors to come in with no opening in sight. And going back to your question of when do you think you're going to open? Well, the answer is I don't know. I guess it's going to be down to one thing, and that is, when does the government actually feel that enough people are protected to then, let things unravel? Maybe April.
I wonder if you feel, as a big business owner, as the owner of as we said, the UK's largest nightclub operator, that the Conservative Party is losing the title of the party of business because it's not helping businesses like yours, you say?
I completely agree. I can't see how they've helped business at all. They pay us lip service. They have meetings with us over Zoom. They appear to be concerned, and they're going to take our case. We've met government. We've met the Bays people on a number of occasions. We felt we were going to get bailed out. I absolutely agree. I don't think they're our friends whatsoever.
Do you think the Labour Party might be?
If I'm honest, I don't think so. I just feel like we're just washed on the shore, collateral damage, not cared about, small enough to get away with it. I think that's it. And we just got to keep banging on in the hope that one day someone might think, actually, nightclubs, they're a really important part of going out. It's an important part of people's growing up. And to see them die in the numbers that they're going to die will be just a travesty. But unless people get behind us, I don't think that any government's ever going to listen to us.
But just finally, unfortunately, it sounds from what you're saying, Peter, like you think it might actually be too late for you.
Yeah, I mean, we said that we were going to run out in the middle of December of cash, and that hasn't changed. We weren't lying. We weren't making it up. We said we need help by the end of October. Otherwise, we're in real trouble.
Good to speak to you, although I'm afraid it's pretty grim out there, isn't it? Peter Marks, Chief Executive of the Deltic Group, the UK's largest operator of nightclubs. Whether it's pubs, whether it's clubs, I'm afraid for that part of the economy, things are looking really very difficult indeed. And when it comes to the political point, I wonder if you've prepared your business either for Brexit or for coronavirus, whether you think this government, this Conservative government, is actually on your side. This has been the mantra of Conservative parties for many generations, that they are the party of business. Do you think they're losing that? 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850. You can tweet at LBC. We'll speak to Lord Stuart Rose in just a few moments' time, boss of M&S, boss of the Arcadia Group, on what he makes of not only the COVID restrictions, but also of the preparations for that Brexit deal or not. Tom Swarbrick on LBC, 1117.
The fight against coronavirus. For the very latest, stay with LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Morning to you. Do you think your business, do you think the economy can survive a no-deal Brexit on top of the coronavirus crisis that we are living through? The London School of Economics suggests that 2 to 3 times larger is going to be the hit to the economy if we have a no-deal Brexit than that of coronavirus. Coronavirus, they say, will see the economy down by 1.7% by 2020. For a no-deal Brexit, 8% of GDP will be lost by 2020. I wonder how your preparations are going for Brexit, a Brexit that we do not yet know the conclusions of the talks, certainly, or whether or not we're going to end up with no deal. George is in Luton. Tom, Tim Martin for PM. Blimey. What this government has done is nothing short of criminal, he says. We'll speak to Professor Susan Michie in just a moment from SAGE. First, here's Margaret in Stevenage. Hi there, Margaret.
Hello there. How are you? Well,
hello.
I actually look forward to going. I actually live in Surbiton.
Right.
or I'm in Surbiton, and when I'm in Surbiton, I actually go to the Wetherspoons and just look forward to going out in the morning.
You're a morning Weatherspooner.
Well, I go out for a coffee in the morning, and then I might go shopping and come back and probably have a half a lager. I don't drink very much, and I certainly.
Well, you can't now, Margaret. You can't, I'm afraid, because you've got to have. Well, you could do it, but you need a substantial meal with it.
Yeah, well, the point is, the staff there are very sympathetic because they know I've got a health difficulty and I'm not always able to eat out.
Do you understand why these rules exist like this?
I understand, but I don't understand why. I don't understand why the governments aren't fining people for throwing masks along our street. You know,
for throwing masks.
Oh, they throw masks and they're dirty and they're on the floor and they're on the ground and they're filthy, and that's bound to cause a virus, isn't it? If they've been worn as well.
Yeah, you've got to dispose of those carefully. Margaret, thank you very much indeed. 0345 6060 973 1122. Professor Susan Michie joins us, Professor of Health Psychology, Director of the Centre for Behaviour Change at UCL, also a member of SAGE. Thank you for coming on the programme, Professor. Let's start with these tiers then. Can you see why people are so frustrated, having been in a tier 1 before lockdown now completed, they're now in tier 3, some of these people?
Yes, I can understand that some people are confused, some people are frustrated, some people are disappointed. I think I understand that the government is going to be sharing all the data that explains why the different regions are as they are. And my understanding there's 5 different criteria. So it's not just the level that you're on at the moment, but is it increasing? It's also what's the capacity of your local health service? And so some areas have been lumped in with other areas because the entire region is served by one or more hospitals. Mm-hmm. And so, that has to be taken into account. And the other thing is that it's also dependent on what the level of transmission is in the areas around every locality, because obviously people aren't staying completely still. They're moving according to shopping, work, etc.
Can I ask you then, in a tier 3 area, the shops will soon be open, non-essential retail will be allowed to reopen. How long am I meant to spend in a tier 3 non-essential shop, do you think, to keep me safe and the staff safe? How long should I be spending in there?
No time.
No time?
No time. What we know is that the more people are in contact with each other, the longer period of time, the closer proximity, and especially if that's indoors, the more risky you are. And the problem is, if it's indoors and there's not really good ventilation, then you only need one infected person in that shop to have sneezed and coughed a bit, and then you have aerosol, these tiny droplets that stay in the air for many hours. And so, if you rush in and rush out, you should be all right, especially if you're wearing a mask, which obviously is legal, everybody must do that. Mm-hmm. But the longer time you spend in a shop, the more likely you are to get infected. It's I'm afraid it's not a simple thing where you can say, if you're in for X number of minutes, you're safe. It just isn't the case, because we also vary massively in our vulnerability. And that depends on our genes, our state of health. And none of us know that. So it's a bit like Russian roulette. We're all taking a gamble anytime we put ourselves into a place where other people are who might be infected.
Yes, I guess that we're sort of doing that anyway, regardless of coronavirus. But obviously coronavirus is an additional risk now. The argument goes, at least from Michael Gove, that the NHS needs much greater protection, that the NHS risks being overwhelmed. I wonder if you can understand why, for some people, that is starting to that argument rubs people up the wrong way a bit, given that we have had many, many months of trying to protect the NHS. We locked down last time to protect the NHS. The Nightingales are there, they're not being used. How much more protecting does the NHS need?
Well, I was in a meeting yesterday and a doctor there was saying in the hospital where she works that all of the operating theatres are now full of COVID patients, that there's no routine work, no routine surgery being done whatsoever. Everything's been cancelled and they're absolutely at the limit. full of COVID patients. So this is the reality of the situation we're in, and one has to just deal with the reality. What that means is that, you or I get knocked down by a car or something, need urgent treatment, we're less likely to get that treatment if the local hospitals are full. So, it's a real thing. It's not just
of course it's a real thing. No, I understand that, but why then are the Nightingales not open to help that capacity?
Because buildings don't look after patients on their own. They need trained, skilled staff.
Sure.
And we're desperately short of that. I know.
So they were useless anyway. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. There's no point in building capacity in the NHS that can't be staffed by anybody. Do you think the Nightingales were basically a PR stunt?
I can't answer that question. I don't think so. I think people were doing it with the best will, but sometimes there's expertise lacking, and I think there wasn't enough taking into account that you need people, you need the right kind of people, but you do need trained people, and training takes time to do. So quite often, I'm afraid, the government has been on the back foot and not preparing and thinking enough in advance. And so we're sort of dealing with problems as we go.
Good to talk to you, if not slightly depressing. Professor Susan Michie, thank you very much indeed for your time. Professor of Health Psychology, Director of the Centre for Behaviour Change at UCL, member of SAGE. David's in Mill Hill this morning. Hi there, David.
Good morning. I'm really concerned that the track and trace has been ignored completely. You've got Dido, who's extinct, trying to run it, and it's not being run properly. We don't know what's going on. We haven't been given the information. It's ridiculous.
You certainly got the trace element of test and trace that's not meeting their own targets for percentage of contacts that are being traced, and that's been falling for some time.
Because it's being run by a useless woman. She was useless before, and she's useless now.
David. Take the ball, not the man here. You might want to have a go at that, but there's no way to call her a useless idiot.
Why is it that they haven't reverted to using local people to do the track and tracing rather than trying to do it on a basis that isn't working by their own volition?
Perfectly good question about why it's not done at the local level.
Yeah, but it should be, shouldn't it? And I don't see how the tier system is going to be able to work properly if that's not properly in place.
Well,
we don't get the information of how it's spreading. I don't know. Do you?
Yeah. No, David, you're absolutely spot on. There is no point in having this tiered system if you can't unmask the virus via test and trace. So you're absolutely right. How an area gets back down from tier 3 to tier 2 to tier 1 is going to be based on test and trace. If that's not working properly, we're in the real shtuck. Thank you for your call. Nikki's in Dorchester. Hi there, Nikki.
Hello. Now, just 3 quick points. I'll try and be quick. Firstly, why I cannot go into a pub for just a couple of pints. Now, that tells me that I'm more viable or I'm more acceptable to catching the virus or passing it on than if I went in to have a meal. Secondly...
Why? In what way does it... Hang on a sec, hang on, before we get to 2, let's deal with 1. Why do you feel yourself to be more susceptible of catching and spreading the virus by having a pint rather than a pint and a meal?
I'm not saying that, but that's what I want to discuss and find out.
You just said that.
No, if I just go in for a pint,
yes,
am I more likely to catch it than rather sit down for a meal?
It strikes me that if you have more people going in there for just drinks, then they can't, I don't know, can they do it in a COVID-secure way?
Well, in response to that, if I just go in for a pint or 2, I'll be there probably an hour. Whereas if I go and sit down for a meal, I'll be there for maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours.
An hour for 2 pints? Nikki, you're nursing those things, aren't you?
Sorry?
Go to point 2, man, quickly.
Right. The meal deal that the Chancellor introduced early on in the year, if you spend more money, i.e. spending money on a meal, etc., there'll be more VAT tax receipts for the Chancellor. He's trying to claw back the money that was spent on this meal deal.
The Eat Out to Help Out?
Yes.
Right. Okay. And point 3?
Now, regarding university students going home at Christmas, they're going to have 2 tests before they leave to go home. Correct?
Yes.
Right. So when they've been at home, every part of the UK, for 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, are they going to be tested on their return?
Back to university?
University students.
Yes, on their return to university, are they going to be tested? Well, they were. Some of them were tested by their universities when they arrived there in the first place. So you'd hope that would carry on.
Yes, I hope so. Because don't forget, these are going to Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales. But that's what I'd like to know.
Well, let's. I think if the universities were doing it already, hopefully they will continue to do it. Nikki, thank you. Nursing his pints and nursing through the conversation. We'll speak to Lord Stuart Rose in just a moment, chairman of Ocado, former CEO of Marks & Spencer's and the Arcadia Group, which is, I'm afraid, really struggling at the moment. A potential rescue deal is in the pipeline. We'll speak to Lord Rose about the viability of that. Tom Swarbrick on LBC, 11:32. News headlines now. Philip Chrysikos.
The Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab has told Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC the new tiered coronavirus restrictions for England are needed. It says the Prime Minister is trying to convince his own Conservative MPs to back the new rules ahead of a Commons vote on Tuesday. Separately, Dominic Raab has also told Swarbrick on Sunday there's still major disagreement between the UK and the EU over fishing as Brexit talks continue in London. As the Foreign Secretary adds there is a deal to be done, Number 10 says it could be the last week of negotiations. Labour is urging the government to suspend peak rail fares and provide mass coronavirus testing for transport workers during the festive period. The party is demanding Transport Secretary Grant Shapps presents a comprehensive travel plan to Parliament tomorrow. The weather, dull, grey and misty for many throughout today, although there will be sunny spells across the southwest of England, northeast of Scotland and parts of West Wales, a high of 8 degrees.
This is LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Here's John on 84850 this morning. Tom, I'm sick of all these high turnover businesses going on and on and on about the lockdown. They don't care about us. At this moment, they are like miners. Ask a miner about his job. No one cared about them, says John. It's a pretty harsh view of a lot of businesses who are struggling. I do wonder if there is a political cost to some of the measures that businesses are having to undergo, not just to deal with coronavirus, but if Brexit goes up the Swanee as well, if we're in a period of time where we have a poorly coordinated no-deal Brexit in January, plus all that's come around through coronavirus, whether the Conservative Party's reputation as apparently the party for business is going to be absolutely trashed. You see Labour are up in the polls. They're ahead of the Conservative Party in the polls again. As a business owner, as a business person, could you see yourself voting for Keir Starmer's Labour Party to be the party of business? 0345 6060 973. Let's get to Lord Stuart Rose this morning, Chairman of Ocado, former CEO of Marks & Spencer's and the Arcadia Group, of course. Thank you very much for coming on the programme this morning, Lord Rose. Let me start off just by asking you about your time at Arcadia and the time that it is now going through. What do you think has led to this fall from grace? Some of the great brands seem to be going by the wayside.
Well, I think what you're seeing is, Tom, you're seeing what happens in retail all the time. I've been involved in retail for 40-odd years. You get constant change. We've had natural churn, but you have had two or three other things going on. You've had the massive shift in channel shift, and that channel shift has been accelerated with what's happened with COVID. So you suddenly got a perfect storm, and those businesses that haven't invested, those businesses that are not relevant anymore, those businesses that are exclusively bricks and mortar are the ones that are suffering, and Arcadia is one of those.
Do you rate Sir Philip Green?
Listen, Philip and I go back a long way. I first met him 25 years ago. I don't really want to discuss his strengths and weaknesses. That's for somebody else to do. But I've had my fights with him. Let's put it that way.
And do you think that the Mike Ashley 50 million quid rescue deal is one that could work, is one that he should take? Because there are a lot of jobs on the line here.
Well, listen, the last thing is the most important. We've got to worry about the massive impact this is going to have on employment. And this is not just Arcadia, this is sector-wide. You'll have seen the stats. There's forecast 20,000 store closures this year, 250,000 further retail jobs to go. If anybody can pick up bits and parts of this business and save some jobs, I'm all for that. But I'm a bit pessimistic, I will admit.
Let me come on to something that you've said to a newspaper in the last few days when you're talking about the Conservative Party and particularly the government. Quotes, they seem to be quite naive about business. You can't just turn a business off and on again, you say. People have to be got ready, goods have to be ordered, factories have to be warmed up or cooled down. Do you think the government doesn't understand businesses and the impact that it's having on business?
Well, listen, the Chancellor said this week that we're the end of one crisis, hopefully, and the beginning of another. I think he said it very clearly. We are in a crisis. I am a simple businessman. I'm a shopkeeper, but I can see problems coming up. And what we've got to do now is we've got to make choices. We have to make that choice between livelihoods and lives. And I think the government has been a bit naive in trying to believe that by introducing these tiers, lockdown one day, no lockdown the next day, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. You try running a business in such an environment, it's almost an impossible feat to accomplish.
Do you think that's just by dint of the policy that they've tried to put in to try and save lives, that I'm afraid for now businesses do have to take a bit of a back seat?
Well, listen, that is the big debate. But I think we've got one or two things. First of all, I think we were late to the party. I don't want to rake over the past, but we've had COVID now for a year. I'm sure COVID was in London before Christmas last year. So here we are, nearly December again, number one. Number two, we were late in doing something about it. Number three, we didn't stop a lot of people coming into the country. Number four, we overpromised and underdelivered consistently. We've had nothing but rhetoric. We've had a whole pile of rhetoric about moonshots. We've had a whole pile of rhetoric about how we're going to suddenly swap this virus out of the way. And we always should have understood that it was going to take a long time to get the right side of it. But we should have also had the debate in public openly about, on the one hand, you can have this, i.e. save all the lives. On the other hand, you can keep some part of the economy going, but you can't have both. And it doesn't need to be binary. We could have some choices, and I think we've made some bad choices.
You don't just take aim at the government. You say that we've actually become quite a pathetic society. I wonder what you mean by that.
Well, listen, I'm an old man. I'm 71, but I'm still working.
That's not old.
Quite amusing. I got a train up north last week. I was the only person on the train. Where's everybody else? I got a plane to Dubai last weekend to do business on Saturday and Sunday. I was nearly the only person on the plane. I'm still working. Where's everybody else? Why don't they get back? And I think we have gone a little bit soft, but I come from a different generation. I was born post-war when everybody just got on with stuff. And if you look at the stats, Tom, for people who are dying on a basis of per million, yes, this is a very nasty illness, but it is not an illness which is a magnitude of 5 or 6 times more mortal, more deadly than previous epidemics that we have had.
So you think some of the restrictions that have been in place that have kiboshed various businesses have been too much, unnecessary?
No, I think we should have prepared better, if you really want to. Listen, I understand the need for us to make sure that we protect the NHS, but what is the driver? Is it NHS capacity? Is it deaths? Is it the optics of deaths, i.e. the fact that we don't want to see them? Or is it something else? Now, listen, I don't believe personally that from what I hear that all the hospitals are running at 100% capacity. We're trying to protect some space, understandably, for things like elective surgery. But I also want to know why, for instance, that the Nightingale hospitals, much lauded when they were opened, are not being used. And I suspect the primary reason, Tom, that they're not being used is we haven't got the staff trained up to run them. So this is not a capacity problem for beds. It's a capacity problem for human resource. But we should have fixed that. We've been at it for 11 months.
That has been the reason given to us, certainly by a member of SAGE. Part of the reason why I think there should be much more made of the military medics that might be available to try and help in those hospitals, in those Nightingales.
You raise a very important point. They call them the Nightingale hospitals. Florence Nightingale was in the Crimean War. She was working in a field hospital. Field hospitals are essentially what we have now got with the Nightingale hospitals, but they're empty. But we've got a war on. We're fighting a war against COVID.
Let me just ask you finally about Brexit. Businesses being asked to prepare for circumstances not yet known because we don't know whether we're going to get a deal or not. Do you think the economy can weather a no-deal Brexit plus everything that's happening with coronavirus?
Well, you've just answered your own question, if I might say so, partly. I mean, how can you prepare for what you don't know? I deeply hope that we get a deal. I'm confident that something will happen, but I know a lot of businesses who do not know what they are preparing for. And necessarily, if we're going to have change, and it doesn't matter if it's a deal that we have, but we're still going to need change. January, February, March is going to be very tough on top of COVID. So you've answered your own question. Early part of 2021, I'm a bit grim.
Let me ask you a question I haven't yet answered, which is whether you think the Conservative Party, if there is a no-deal Brexit, the confusion of a Brexit chaos in the new year, plus everything that's happening with the economy on COVID, are they in danger of receiving some political backlash and sort of losing this mantra as the party of business?
Well, one would imagine so.
That's a brief and succinct answer. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Lord Stuart Rose, Chairman of Ocado, former CEO of Marks & Spencer and the Arcadia Group as well. Good to speak to you on the programme this morning. 0345 6060 973 is my number, 84850 to text. Tweet at LBC. We'll speak to the President of the Confederation of British Industry in just a few moments' time too. Tom Swarbrick here, 11:45.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast, LBC.
The Chancellor signalled no support for 3 million self-employed, not covered by income protection schemes. Well, they've become known as Excluded UK. The founder, Annika Hicks, joins me. How do you react, Annika?
Sickening disappointment, really.
People are going to go bankrupt. They're just going to go broke, aren't they?
Every time there's an announcement, the volunteer team and myself are inundated with people who don't see any other way out. We've lost 7 or 8 members of the community within the last 4 weeks. It's just not fair.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast, weekday mornings from 7, LBC. This is LBC Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850.
President of the CBI joins us in just a second. First, Cleese is in Brixton. Hi there, Cleese.
Hello, Tom.
Hello, sir.
I was just listening to your last caller there just now, the 71-year-old man who was saying he's 71 years old and he goes to Dubai. He's still hoping to run his shop, whatever he does. I've had a liver transplant. I'm supposed to be one of the person who's shielding. I'm supposed to have a low immune suppression. I must admit, when the COVID first came out and they said we should shield, yes, I did 6, 7, 8 weeks of shielding. To the boredom of my own mind, I was getting really mad. But saying that, I think it was a good thing. Now, we've had that, and 1 minute they're doing this, and the next minute they're doing that. It's like a seesaw. Nobody's know what the hell's going on, Tom. And as far as I can see it, majority of the people out here is fine. I'm not going to say a lot of people won't get COVID. We've had the evidence. Many thousands of people have died. Unfortunately, for the loved ones who survived, I'm really sorry for those people.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying, the country needs to survive. Right now, who knows? We might end up a third world country with the debt the government is putting us in.
The seesawing nature, the unpredictability of the COVID restrictions would be bad enough if it wasn't, I don't think, put on top of the seesawing unpredictability of whatever's coming down the line with Brexit.
This is what I'm talking about. We don't know what's going to happen with Brexit. We don't know what's going to happen with this COVID. We know for one thing for sure, it's not going anywhere. It's going to be forever here, just like the flu.
Please listen and mind how you go. Look after yourself. We are a bit all over the place, aren't we? Lord Bill Moria joins us. Karen Bill Moria, President of the CBI, founder and chairman of Cobra Beer. Thank you very much for coming on the programme, Lord Bill Moria. Let's start with coronavirus. Lots of people are now very, very upset about their particular parts of the economy. I wonder whether you see these new tiers as being even more damaging to them.
Tom, thank you very much. With the CBI, we are in touch with business all around the country. We speak for 190,000 businesses employing 7 million people. That's 1/3 of the private sector workforce, and just about all the major trade associations from the National Farmers Union to the Law Society. And the message we're getting very clearly, very, very clearly, is we want clarity. We want clarity about how you go into tiers and clarity about how you come out of tiers and the timing of it. I mean, the economy has been decimated. We've had a drop of over 11% in our GDP this year. That is the worst in 300 years. We've got a deficit of £400 billion. We've already spent approaching £300 billion on rescuing this economy from the virus. And we've had to do that. And I thank the government for that. And the Chancellor has been brilliant with things like the job furlough. The furlough scheme has been absolutely essential in saving millions of jobs and businesses, the guaranteed loan schemes, the reduction in VAT. But the but is, at Tier 3 and Tier 2, many, many businesses are not viable. I mean, the hospitality industry that employs almost 4 million people, they can't operate at a Tier 3 level. Many of them just can't open. Wet-led pubs cannot open. Pubs are at the heart of the community. We talk about mental health. Well, the pubs are a big part of a community. And if a pub is going to close down, and tens of thousands of pubs are at risk now, thousands of jobs are at risk. We've got to make sure that we go down the tiers safely as soon as we can. And the other thing we ask for is evidence. Where is the evidence? Where is the evidence that the infections come from the hospitality industry, from restaurants and pubs? We kept asking for it. I don't know how many times in Parliament as a crossbench peer I've challenged the government. I never get a clear answer on that. Even the 10 p.m. curfew. Now they've been sensible about that and said, okay, everyone doesn't spill out onto the streets at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. You can stay until 11 o'clock. So they've listened on that. Now they've also got to listen in providing evidence, because the way out of this is very clear. Tom, you're going to say something, but I want to make this point very important. We're going to get this bridge through to the other end. I think by spring next year, this economy will start getting back to normal if three things happen. One is the vaccines are rolled out, and the government is committed to that. We've had the great news, and this is something the CBI has been calling for. We've got Nadine Zahawi, a minister now responsible for rolling it out. The next thing is rapid mass antigen affordable lateral flow testing, which tells you within 10 minutes if you've got COVID or not. In Liverpool, they've trialed it. You've seen Liverpool has gone down from tier 3 to tier 2 within weeks because of rapid testing. We can do that. The next is the therapeutics. We're getting good news on repurposed therapeutics all the time. So with government support and these three things, we can get to the other side. And I'm really confident that business can bounce back because we've demonstrated that in the summer, July, August, September. We've given that little window, that little glimmer, and look how well business performed. So we can do it, and we can do it again in the future if that bridge is built to the other side.
You talk about certainty and the lack of it. And I think at the start of this crisis, people were forgiving of the government for a lack of certainty about what was coming because we didn't know what was coming. Do you think that people are less forgiving of the lack of certainty? Even today, we still don't know really when these tiers are going to end or how they're going to end.
And this is a learning process. And again, you've got to give some slack that the government is learning all the time. It's only 9 months that we've been in this. Look at what we've done in 9 months. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine being developed, tested, rolled out, almost ready to roll out within months. We've had Moderna, Pfizer, and others coming through. This is remarkable.
if it's not the coronavirus crisis that where the slack is cut, we've had 4 years since the vote to leave the European Union. We still don't know whether we're going to get a trading deal with the EU. How is business going to be able to respond with all the difficulties of coronavirus plus a potential no-deal Brexit?
So to answer your earlier question, we want that certainty and flexibility. And the government shouldn't be flexible. Why does the decision have to be made every fortnight? Why can't we have a decision made every week that if somebody's regions come down, they can go down a tier? Because the difference between tier 3 and 2 is huge. The difference between tier 2 and tier 1 is huge. And it's people's jobs and livelihoods at stake over here. So that certainty and that flexibility, they've got to act even quicker. And when it comes to Brexit, we are just waiting. We're keeping fingers crossed. Please, can we have a deal? We need that deal. We need that platform to build on so that all the other aspects of our relationship going forward, we can build on in the future if we get that deal now. And I'm very confident we'll get 4.5 years. We've been going 4.5 years of that uncertainty. Let's get that deal right now. Europe's calling for it. We're calling for it.
Let me ask finally the question that I asked others here, which is with the lack of certainty, the toing and froing that might be natural as part of some of the response to the coronavirus, but of course with Brexit on top of it, is the Conservative Party in danger of falling out of, or businesses in danger of falling out of apparent love with the Conservative Party? That its title as the party of business is up for grabs now?
The Conservative Party's always had the reputation of being a pro-business party. Well, one of the things is, of course, tax. Now there are all these calls for taxes to be raised. How are we going to pay for all this? Well, now is not the time to be talking about it. Now is the time for the Conservative Party to continue what it's done, to try and support businesses to provide that bridge, but also looking ahead, there should be no talk of tax rises because that will stifle the recovery. We need to encourage this recovery, and I have confidence the government will listen again there. Tax rises, if they're there, are for another time, not now, when we need to encourage business and encourage the consumers and give that confidence for us to come out of this. And I'm confident we can next spring onwards.
We'll see if they listen. Lord Bill Moria, thank you. Karen Bill Moria, President of the CBI, founder and chairman of Cobra Beer. Michael's in Carlow in Ireland before the news at 12. Hi there, Michael.
Hi. I'm just phoning about this. You know, we've known about the splits in the two major parties now, and we need to basically accept there's one in the Tory party between the people who, you know, run the businesses that produce things and the people who run the finance industries. And the whole financial sector has got different goals and objectives to people working on the high street. And that's my position.
That the bricks and mortar economy has been perhaps not taken into as much account as some of the financial services. Well, let's see if and when this Brexit deal happens. Michael, thank you. We move on. After the news at 12, the mum who killed her 6 children is freed after just 8 years. This is Marrade Philpott, who has served just half of her sentence, is now being allowed out. Should she be?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 12 o'clock, Boris Johnson is being accused of destroying the hospitality and retail industries and the lives of those employed by them with England's new coronavirus tier system. Tier 3 means pubs are shut apart from takeaways, while those in Tier 2, people need to buy what's described as a substantial meal if they want a drink. Founder and chairman of pub chain JD Wetherspoons, Tim Martin, has told Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC the measures are destroying a British tradition.
It's rather an amazing situation. Pubs are geared up for selling beer. And if you suddenly become a quasi-restaurant, you're not really set up for it. And as for being shut, it speaks for itself. So dire, terrible.
In response, the Prime Minister says England's tier system has an expiry date of the 3rd of February as he tries to fight off a backlash from his own MPs ahead of a Commons vote on Tuesday. In other headlines this hour, the Foreign Secretary says fishing rights remain an outstanding major bone of contention in post-Brexit trade talks with the European Union. Dominic Raab has told Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC that there is a deal to be done, but is urging Brussels to recognise the point of principle on the UK's control of its waters.
The EU have got to accept that point of principle, that as an independent coastal state, we have control over our own fisheries. And insisting that we can only have control over 18% of the fish within those waters is not consistent with that.
The UK's most senior police officer is defending stop and search, saying it's saving young black lives in London. Metropolitan Police Commissioner Dame Cressida Dick tells the Sunday Times an increase of knives means a black youth is now 9 times more likely to be killed than a white youth. Labour wants the Transport Secretary to present a comprehensive travel plan to Parliament tomorrow, covering the 23rd to the 27th of December. The UK government and devolved administrations have agreed a temporary easing of coronavirus rules over Christmas. Shadow Transport Secretary Jim McMahon has told Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC what Labour is calling for.
Making sure that there are engineering works taking place that mean that bottlenecks can be created or even that demand is concertinaed. The second area that we've asked them to look at is on the use of peak and off-peak tickets. What we do see is a bottleneck naturally that gets created with the last off-peak train and the first off-peak train. So we're asking them to review the peak and off-peak tickets as well.
David Prowse, who played Darth Vader in the original Star Wars trilogy, has died at the age of 85. He was also the Green Cross Codeman, a superhero character created to promote the government's road safety campaign to children in the 1970s. The weather, dull, grey and misty for many throughout this afternoon, although the northeast of Scotland will see some sunny spells, longer spells of sunshine for parts of West Wales and southwest England, a high of 8 degrees. From Global's newsroom, I'm Philip Chrysikos.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
Very good afternoon to you. Just gone midday this Sunday afternoon. You are listening to Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC. I'm Tom Swarbrick. I hope we find you very well so far today. I want to talk about this case of Marrade Philpott. If you remember this, actually, I don't think you can forget it, to be honest, given how utterly horrifying this was. If this is the first time you've heard of it, this is a wife and husband, Marrade Philpott, and her husband, Mick, who were jailed 8 years ago for killing their children, 6 of them, in a arson plot in their own home, which went, I'm afraid, very, very tragically wrong. They set fire to their own home in order to try and blame it on somebody else, in order to see whether they could get a bigger council house. Unfortunately, the fire took hold. The 6 children were upstairs and they perished as a result. As part of the cover-up by these two, they staged a press conference. And if you remember back in 2012, they did this press conference where they were shedding tears and they were incredibly upset. How on earth could this happen? This is so awful. We've lost our 6 children. Only for the police to become suspicious at their performance at that press conference, bug their hotel, and discover that actually they had plotted to set fire to their own home in order to try and bring about this swindle. Their children died as a result. And now Marrade Philpott is being released from prison after serving just half her sentence. She was freed last Friday after serving 8.5 years of a 17-year sentence for manslaughter. She and her then husband Mick Philpott were jailed after plotting a blaze at their home in Derby that went so wrong. Dwayne, 13, Jade, 10, John, 9, Jack, 7, and Jesse, 6, and Jaden, 5, died from smoke inhalation as a result of the May 2012 fire. Just imagine that. I mean, it's just beyond imagination, really, isn't it? To lose a child is horrific. To lose 6 in a fire done by your own making, is, well, it's something, as I say, if you remember it, you won't forget it. The government has moved quite far in recent years in trying to come up with a system that means that people who are sentenced for long spells in prison actually serve all that time in prison. But it doesn't seem to be able to act retrospectively, and Marrade Philpott, amongst many others, we hear a lot about terrorist cases too, is now going to be released from prison. A Ministry of Justice spokesperson confirmed that the sentence was at the halfway point, saying offenders released on licence face strict conditions and can be returned to prison if they breach them. Well, why, if there's strict conditions outside, are they not in prison? Are we really saying that 17 years or longer, half of it is served inside, sometimes less than half inside, and the rest of the time you're on very, very strict conditions and can be returned at any point if you breach them? Why? Why not keep people inside if they're going to be deemed a risk? 0345 6060 973 84850 to text. You can tweet at LBC. What is the justification for releasing at the halfway point for people who have been involved in such horrific acts like this? Come to your calls in just a few moments. First, I spoke to Dominic Raab a little earlier, the Foreign Secretary, First Secretary of State, Conservative MP for Esher and Walton, and I asked him what he made of Marrade Philpott's release.
Yes, look, a very serious case. We take a very robust approach. Both Priti Patel, Home Secretary, Rob Buckland, Justice Secretary, bringing through reforms to make sure that there is even more robust and rigorous. I will, if you don't mind, not interfere in the legal process in relation to individual cases, but we are concerned to make sure both the severity and the moral gravity in those very, very serious cases, not to mention the public safety, is respected. And I will, of course, want the Justice Secretary to look at individual cases. Sorry,
it does worry you that, though, just finally. It worries you that this decision has been made. However it's been made, and I'm not going to try and barrack you into a position where you have to override some of the legal principles that might be underpinning it, but that it does worry you, right?
I take the most robust approach in cases like this, but what I'm not going to do is impugn a legal process, not least because it could undermine the very protections I want to see enforced.
Raab, the Foreign Secretary, speaking to me a little bit earlier this morning. Mid-Derbyshire MP Pauline Latham says the Philpotts' crime was the worst in Derby in living memory, if not ever. The idea that such a foul woman is going to have her liberty while her children lie in their graves is one which no right-minded person can easily contemplate. It is too soon, she says, after the death of those children. David Spencer joins us. He's from the Centre for Crime Prevention. And Paul Garlick is a QC, a barrister in criminal law. Thank you both for joining the programme. Mr Spencer, let's start with you first. I wonder what you make of this decision to release at the halfway point. Mr Spencer, I wonder if you can hear me. I'm not sure whether you can hear me or not. Let's try Paul Garlick, QC, barrister in criminal law. Paul, thank you very much for being there. Again, same question to you. Do you think that this is a decision that can be explained?
Yes, Tom, I do. The position in this case is that the lady in question, Marrade Philpott, she wasn't convicted of murder. She was convicted of manslaughter. That's the first thing to note. And because of that, the sentencing is completely different to an offence for murder. If you're convicted of murder, there has to be a life sentence, and the judge orders that you serve a minimum term before you can apply for parole. But that's not the case in this case. She wasn't convicted of murder. I'm not going to go into the merits of the case or what the conviction should have been, but she was convicted of manslaughter and given what we call a determinate sentence. That's a fixed sentence of 17 years. And the law is that if you receive a determinate sentence, once you've served half that sentence, you are automatically released on licence. And for the rest of the sentence, you are on licence, and if you commit any further offences or disregard any of the conditions of the licence, and there can be very strict conditions of the licence, you can be immediately recalled to prison. So it's not a decision process, it's an automatic operation by law.
Why?
Because you have to give prisoners who have a determinate sentence some reason for rehabilitation. I'm not saying that this woman has been rehabilitated, she may have been, but also you've got to give them some contemplation, expectation when they're in prison, that if they behave themselves while they're in prison, they will be released earlier. And also, if we didn't have it, we would double the prison population. And the prison population at the moment is the highest in Europe. If we didn't have it, the prison system would just collapse.
So the knowledge that you're going to get out of prison is there by dint of the fact that you have a time length on your prison stay of 17 years in this case. But we offer a way out earlier for good behaviour or for rehabilitation, but we're not suggesting that people who do get out at that halfway point have been rehabilitated.
No, we're not suggesting that. But if they do, when you're released, you don't give them carte blanche. There are strict conditions. There may be conditions that she doesn't approach children. There could be all sorts of conditions attaching to her licence. And if she breaches any of those, she can be recalled and probably would be recalled to prison to serve the remaining of a sentence automatically.
Let me bring in David Spencer, who I think we've got back. David Spencer from the Centre for Crime Prevention. Thank you for being there, David.
A pleasure.
Paul's explained the conditions there, and at least the law around it. Does the law make sense to you?
Well, no, I don't think it does, to be perfectly honest. I think she's been given 17 years. She has killed 6 of her children, and I think the majority of people would expect her to serve her full sentence for such a terrible crime.
Paul?
Well, the law is the law. You have to change the law. This is not one of those cases where a murderer is released on parole and it's a decision by the parole board, which may be a wrong decision, and we've seen many of those. This is a case where someone is given a definitive sentence and the law says they must be released after serving half the sentence. But if they misbehave once they're released, they will be sent straight back to prison.
And David, if picking up from Paul's earlier point, if everybody who was asked to serve or told that they had to serve very long sentences were kept in prison until the end of their very long sentences, we'd double the prison population.
Well, I mean, I don't think that is an excuse for letting people get off lightly for committing very serious crimes.
So build more prisons?
Build more prisons, if needs be, yes.
Paul?
Well, that's not my viewpoint. I mean, I've been sitting as a judge for over 20 years, and you've got to have, I mean, even with someone described, an earlier speaker described this as the most heinous offence that's been committed in the county. I can think of, I mean, it is very serious. It is heinous, but it's not the most heinous because by the very fact she was convicted of manslaughter and not murder, that does reduce the length of the sentence.
But if we've got to the point, and Paul, you've explained the law very well. If we've got to the point where a decision is made because on the basis that actually rehabilitation may not have happened, and partly only because we don't have the space in prisons, that's not putting the safety of the public first, is it?
Well, I think, yes. If there was a question of the safety, that would have been built into the sentence when the sentence was imposed, 17 years. But, 8.5 years is, I mean, people may think this is an easy touch, and your David said, she's got off lightly. 8.5 years in prison is an awful long time, particularly for a woman. And if you want to change it, you would have to change the law, by all means. But then there would have to be a proper debate.
Particularly for a woman? Why particularly for a woman?
Well, the conditions in women's prisons are not particularly good. There are very few of them, so it's very much more difficult for people to visit them. And I'm not going to go into the details on the radio now, but I have visited women's prisons. The conditions are not very pleasant.
David, she's had a tough time in there, apparently.
Well, I mean, that's all very sad, isn't it? I think Paul sounds very out of touch with the way that the majority of people in this country will be feeling about this. Make no mistake, this lady is responsible for the death of 6 of her children. That's 6 lives that have lost. and she has spent little more than a year in prison for each of them. I don't think anybody would consider that to be a reasonable sentence. Paul's right that the law needs to be changed to stop this happening automatically, and hopefully the law will be changed. The Home Office has promised us some sentencing reform, and I think for cases like this, it is quite reasonable for the law to be changed to ensure that people like Marrade Philpott serve her full sentence.
But just on that, the court of public opinion might be out of step with the law right now, but it's a good thing that we don't have mob rule, isn't it? I mean, we have to coalesce around some rules, otherwise it would just be up to the mob to decide.
Absolutely. But we're not talking about a simple burglary or an assault. This is somebody who has taken the lives of 6 children. This is a very, very serious offence, and 8 years in prison just does not seem a sufficient penalty for that.
Paul Garlick, QC, barrister in criminal law, thank you to you, and to you, David Spencer, thank you too, from the Centre for Crime Prevention. 0345 6060 973 84850 to text, tweet at LBC. There are changes afoot. The government do want to look at making it tougher to come out at that halfway point automatically if you've been convicted for a very serious crime. I wonder if this is a prime example of why the law does need to change, that Marrade Philpott, having killed 6 of her own children, is coming out of prison after serving just half of her sentence. Why? Why is that the law? And actually, I do think actually David is right there. If it is the case that part of the reason why this happens is, even if you don't know that they're rehabilitated, even if you don't know that they're, are going to be a sort of more functioning member of society once they've been released, if the argument is, well, we don't have enough space, that doesn't put the public safety first, does it? I'm not sure whether that even puts justice first, to be honest. 0345 6060 973. Come to your calls in just a moment. 12:16.
This is LBC. This is LBC Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster.
We've seen this a few times, haven't we? Afternoon to you, by the way. Whether it's some of the terror offenders who have been put into prison and then the parole board has decided that they are fit for release, only unfortunately for them to show themselves up to have not been fit for release and the parole board making a duff decision, or whether it's the automatic release of violent offenders halfway through their prison sentence, which is contained within the laws under which they are sentenced anyway, but nevertheless leads to, and having covered a lot of court cases as a reporter, actually a lot of families, a lot of victims' families, left quite confused by the notion that as the judge says, right, we're handing you a 17-year sentence for this, the family leave court, and if they've not had it, if they're not aware or they haven't had it explained to them by their police officers that are with them, they think that 17 years behind bars. And actually it turns out you can leave within half, even if you haven't been rehabilitated. Yes, you get lots of conditions attached. Yes, you can be recalled to prison if you break some of those conditions, but it's to be out, to be in the community even with conditions attached. And in the case of Marrade Philpott, to have your name changed, to have your identity changed, to be kept safe, which I actually think is understandable given the crime that she committed, the feeling around the crime that she committed, what she did after committing that crime in terms of trying to cover it up. I think actually protection is probably understandable there. But an early release, I'm afraid, isn't for me. 0345 6060 973 is the number. Here's Richard in Romford to kick us off. Richard.
Hello. Thanks for taking my call. I believe the crime was awful. If she'd have stabbed them, I would have said that, she warranted a much more draconian sentence, serving the full 17 and a half years. I think this was possibly, I don't know the people, but possibly the actions of two seriously stupid people who could not foresee that they couldn't control what they started. So, as I say, I'm an ardent supporter of the death penalty for knife crime and all those sort of things, but
I'm not sure we need the death penalty, Richard. Pardon? I mean, we absolutely do not need the death penalty, sir. Well, it doesn't act as a deterrent, does it? But yeah, you've given me yours. I'll give you mine. We don't need it. We're spending
well in excess of £2 million to keep the brother of the Manchester bomber in prison. £2 million. He's going to be there for 50 years, and I just think that it beggars belief that we keep these people alive. But on this case that you're talking about, I think these people were probably quite stupid and they took a chance. They couldn't control it, hence the lies that they told. I would think if she's any sort of a woman, she'd still be churning up with regret. That's how I feel. And as I say, it wasn't that regret wasn't on show in the press conference that they gave back in 2012, just after the incident happened, because they cried crocodile tears for the death of their own children. I agree with that. They were trying to cover it up and they cried crocodile tears. But when the gypsies towed the policeman to his death, they got manslaughter. I can't believe that there's any chance that you could drive 2-3 miles towing something weighing 14 stone.
Well, listen, Richard, we've got to be very careful about what cases you come to your own conclusions about and the language you use about some of the people that are involved in those cases, because some of them are live and some of them have people who are making other kinds of complaints as well. So we've got to be careful about what we say. I don't think the death penalty is a way to go for this country. I think that would be a disaster. It's not a deterrent. You see it in the United States, where it's in place in some states in the United States. It doesn't stop people from going about killing. Adam's in Westminster this afternoon. Hi there, Adam.
Good afternoon, Tom.
Sir.
My blood is boiling again. Had a conversation about a year ago with one of your colleagues, Matt Stadlin, and the story then was about should we deport foreign criminals' families. And I was very vocal and passionate about it then. And when I woke up this morning to my porridge and I heard this nonsense, I just quite simply, Tom, have no faith anymore in the justice system in the United Kingdom. And I'm not going to go into specifics of particular cases, but if society deems it fit that a woman who was complicit in the deaths of 6 of her own children should be free to walk and roam the streets again, after only a few years, then we are, as a society, I think, I just don't know what's wrong with society anymore, Tom. It's just, in my view, there is no law and order. And if I was the Home
Adam,
Secretary...
the thing is, hang on a sec. She would be able to walk the streets anyway as a result of having served 17 years. So you're going to have to cope with, I'm afraid, the idea that people who have committed horrific crimes are going to one day have done their time and have served their time for that particular offence.
Well, we have, I think the law's changed recently in the last few years, and life means life, and there's a certain select few evil, low-life scumbags and ladies who are, I believe, never to be released, Tom. And I think that law quite fairly would be applicable in this case. Because I just can't understand whether or not they intended or not to do what they did, to be actually in that position and think it's okay to do it, strikes me that the people responsible are just absolutely crazy if they think it's okay to burn down their house.
There's no one disagreeing with you that these people are, this is horrific, that nobody is going to, but I do wonder whether the horror of the crime that has been committed and the emotional response to it, a judge, the legal system has to cut through that emotional response and come up with a fair punishment.
Well, that may well be the case, and we're all very emotive about certain things, especially when children are involved. I will give you that.
Quite.
However, the crux of it is, Tom, if we are to be in a society which is a law-abiding society, there must be punishments, and they must be severe enough to act as a deterrent. And if there is no deterrent, then it's basically carte blanche, open season for everyone and anyone to do what they want, Tom, without fear that they're going to be locked up for the rest of their life.
Look, I agree with you. Adam was struggling slightly with the phone line, but I agree with you that there is a balance to be struck between punishment and rehabilitation. I don't think if you were just to say, right, well, there is a particular punishment for a crime that means the punishment acts as a deterrent for that crime, there isn't. You get the point was made about the death penalty straight away, first one up, just a little bit earlier. The death penalty doesn't act as a deterrent, otherwise no one would be committing the crimes that carry with it the punishment of death. Thank you for the call. 0345 6060 973. Text here, Tom, this is exactly why the majority of judges in this country need sacking. Totally out of touch with British society. They live in fantasy worlds. Prison is particularly hard for women. What about men? Out of touch with the real world, says this texter. Peter's in Cardiff this afternoon. Hi there, Peter.
Hello.
Your thoughts?
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes.
Hello. I just wonder what gives you the right to assume that the British public wouldn't vote in the death penalty. We're not talking about hanging. We're talking about actually, as you would in the vet, the big blue injection for the dog that's past its age, to sort of actually put somebody down who's been, well, all this obviously stems from Longford, trying to get Myra Hindley out. Now, do you remember Myra Hindley? Your researcher doesn't.
Yes.
Do you remember the horror of that?
Yes.
You got limp-wristed people, of which you are the follow-on, like Longford, trying to get Myra Hindley, who didn't only just kill children, they tortured them. And they're trying to get them out of prison. And you and the rest of the limp-wristers...
Why am I being tagged with this particularly?
Because you immediately, the guy who said the death penalty... Oh, no, we can't have that. Put it to a vote.
No, I don't think. But Peter, there's a huge ocean. Excuse me. I don't agree with it. There's a huge ocean of difference.
We haven't had the death penalty for 40 years. So
yes, but you also the crimes where the punishment
has gone
was
sky high.
Actually, no. Crime overall has fallen.
Never mind crime overall. We're talking about violent crime and terrorism, where people are slaughtered.
Well, terrorism, depending on your definition, terrorism has always existed.
Don't dance around on the head of a pin.
I'm not dancing around. I can't be straighter with you, Peter. I don't think the death penalty is a good idea because I don't think it acts as a deterrent.
People wouldn't vote in the death penalty. You have no right whatsoever.
I don't think you've got a right to say that they would.
I'm not saying they would. Put it to a vote. But you know right.
You want a referendum on the death penalty?
Not hanging.
I'm not interested in the method.
Of somebody's existence who's proved to be a murderer, hacking soldiers to death in front of the cameras in London.
Mm.
And then
it's interesting you mentioned
that
case.
Legal aid to because he's been attacked in prison. The guy.
Well, do you know what? Do you know what? Peter, you're gonna hate this even more, because as well as not agreeing with the death penalty, I also agree that people should be entitled to legal aid, because the moment it's not there for people you don't like because you remove it is the moment it's not there for you. And I don't think access to justice should be done based on how much money you have in the bank.
People who are terrorists are coming back to this country after committing acts of terrorism are getting the legal aid. People like me, genuine honest taxpayers, can't get legal aid.
Unfortunately, well,
you're a disgrace. You are a bloody disgrace.
If the rules,
an
Peter,
absolute disgrace. I've had enough, sunshine. I've had enough. You're a
finished?
total joke.
All right. Well, okay, fine. Leave you to your afternoon. Not willing to hear it. Ridiculous. 0345 6060 973. I mean, ludicrous. 12:30 headlines. Tim Humphrey.
The Foreign Secretary is warning coronavirus cases would rise exponentially if tougher measures are not applied across entire counties. Dominic Raab's urging Tory rebels to back England's new tier system when it comes into force after the lockdown ends on Wednesday. Labour is asking the government to publish a comprehensive travel plan to stop chaos at Christmas when COVID rules are being relaxed. The party wants peak rail fares to be suspended to help cope with the surge in demand. More than 10,000 turkeys at a farm in North Yorkshire are to be culled after bird flu was confirmed there. Cases were found at a turkey fattening premises near North Allerton yesterday, where a control zone has been placed to stop it spreading. And the weather: sunshine in Wales and Scotland, otherwise dull, grey and misty with rain in the northwest later, and a high of 9.
This is LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Text 84850.
Now, you may have noticed, if you're a listener to LBC on Global Player on your phone or computer, that we're asking you to sign in to continue listening. This is quite exciting because it's the next evolution of LBC and the Global Player app. It means we can do lots of incredibly clever things. The first thing to note is that it is totally free. There is absolutely no catch. You don't pay a dime. It's completely free. It means we can make sure we tailor some of the great extra content and make it personalised just for you by recommending certain shows and certain podcasts as well. Plus, if you're signed in, you'll have personalised content for all of LBC's sister stations as well. So Classic FM, Smooth, Heart, Gold and Capital, you'll get personalised content for them. And again, it's totally gratis, completely free. So please remember to sign in next time you listen to LBC on the LBC or Global Player app. I'm Tom Swarbrick. You're listening to LBC. It's 12:36.
Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster on LBC.
Once again, completely gratis. We'll come to Joe in Greenwich in just a few moments, but I want to talk about one of the stories in the papers regarding The Crown. Have you been watching this? The Netflix sensation that has angered everybody, it would seem, actually. I don't think it's enjoyable anymore. It just makes people incredibly angry. Oliver Dowden, the Culture Secretary, is angry enough about it to try and write to the creators of the programme to make sure that they put a note on the programme to say it is fictional and not a factual documentary. As you know, the royal household seemingly very upset about some of the ways in which they are being portrayed by this particular TV programme. Ingrid Seward is editor of Majesty magazine and author of Prince Philip Revealed. Thank you very much for coming on the programme this afternoon, Ingrid. What do you think the chances are of getting a note on the programme to say that it is fiction and not fact?
Well, I don't see why not. I mean, as you see a lot of television series with, you know, this is not a true story, or this is based on fact, or the character is entirely fictional. So I don't see there's any reason why they couldn't do it. The technicalities of doing it, I wouldn't begin to know. But I think I'm sure probably the writer, Peter Morgan, doesn't probably want to do it, but there is no reason why he can't. And I think it would be a lot fairer if he did.
Might be quite tricky, though. I watched, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, so spoiler alert. I watched it last night, and I'm at the episode where the chap manages to get into Buckingham Palace a couple of times and confront Her Majesty in her bedroom. Now, that happened. So
Michael Fagan, yes, it did happen, yes.
So the conversation between Her Majesty and Michael Fagan, don't know, but the fact that he got in twice is true. So what's the programme to say? This bit's true, this bit's false. How are they to handle that?
Well, I mean, that would be up to the programme regulators to handle it. I don't know. They could say some of the events. That's what they usually say. I think some of the events depicted are entirely fictional. I think that's the sort of way they do it. So they obviously can't say this is true and that's not true. But if people are old enough to remember, the Michael Fagan break-in was a huge story, and he's given a lot of interviews since. And I mean, I don't think he can really remember himself what happened because they're all slightly different, but he says that he did sit down. He sat on the Queen's bed, and he didn't particularly talk about Margaret Thatcher, I don't think, but I think he talked about the state of England and people like him, and I think he was having a good moan. So I mean, I suppose
I have to say, it is. I'd not clocked that he'd got in twice, and I wondered whether there was a bit of creative license used in trying to get him in again. But no, it's absolutely true he did. What do you think ultimately? Because the idea of putting a sort of fictional or fact onto this programme presumably is done to protect the reputation of the royal family, which I wonder whether you agree is taking a bit of a battering through this programme if people believe it all to be true.
Yes, I think. Well, obviously, we here in England think that we know it all and we know everything about the royal family, and I think we're probably mostly thinking about, people it's global, this, you see, and it's got the most enormous audience. And if people don't know anything about the monarchy, why would they not believe it? I think you're really looking more at those people. And I think it is damaging. I mean, especially there's one scene that really annoyed me. And that was when the Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, now this was fairly early on, I think, went to stay with the Queen at Balmoral. And everyone in the house party was extremely unpleasant to her and rude and made her feel awkward. I mean, in a million years, that would never happen, because the Queen, besides being, the Queen and being a family woman and having people to say, she's head of state. And her job is to entertain the Prime Minister of the day and make the Prime Minister of the day feel extremely welcome wherever she might be. It's not to the Queen to decide if she likes her or not.
No, true, but there might have been, I don't know, we weren't there. It might have been a bit of needle.
Well, there might have been, but we weren't there. Sadly, we weren't there.
Well, actually, it's very. David Cameron described some of his trips to Balmoral in one of his books, I think, or the book that he writes about his time in Number 10. And he suggests that the Queen and Prince Philip barbecue or cook food outdoors that they catch as part of their hunting.
Oh, absolutely. And I think in Margaret Thatcher's autobiography, she talks about going and eating a picnic on the banks of the River Dee, and they've got these wonderful sort of Victorian huts and things all over the estate. And then she talks about washing up with the Queen afterwards and wearing rubber gloves. And I think Tony Blair talks about that too. So that seems to be a safe subject, the rubber gloves.
Yes, imagine having your pots and pans and plate and cutlery scooped up by Her Majesty to go and then wash it up. Ingrid, thank you so much. Ingrid Stuart, you're editor of Majesty Magazine, author of Prince Philip Revealed. I want to play you this. This was that moment in 2012 at the press conference that Marrade and Mick Philpott cried their crocodile tears. Take a look at this.
I've actually been down to our home, and what we saw, we just cannot believe it. Excuse me a minute.
Crying crocodile tears for the death of their 6 children. Joe's in Greenwich. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Hello.
Do you
Can
think
you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Do you think this lady should be released at her halfway point, as the law suggests?
No, I most certainly don't. And I'm glad I've had to wait to talk to you, because I was just so angry. And I'm afraid what you've said, Tom, and also the judge, it just shows how out of touch you are with the British people. The majority of British people do want the death penalty restored, I'm quite sure. In this particular case, I think the sentence was far too lenient. I think that they should have got at least 25 years, and I think she should have served every single day of it for what they did.
Well, I agree with you on one and a bit of those things. I absolutely agree that I think every day ought to be served, and for a number of different offences that should be the case too. I don't agree with you about the death penalty, because as Lewis suggests here on text in Liverpool, Tom, if the death penalty works, why isn't America a sea of tranquility?
But the whole point, yes, I agree with that. It's not a deterrent. I agree with you. But, I'm not concerned about that. I'm concerned with punishment. And the reason, I'm old, so I remember this, at the time when it was abolished, people talked about innocent people being hanged. And, of course, there were innocent people hanged, like Timothy Evans, for example. But now that we have DNA and, the chances of that has really diminished, I think that most people would vote for the rest. We're absolutely sick of it. We're sick of, look what's happening here in London. All these young lads being stabbed to death. I'm sick of it.
It's terrible.
The fact that when you go out, you've got to be so careful. Well,
it is worth saying, Joe. Listen, I totally agree. The situation in London and the knife crime is utterly, utterly horrific. And people I don't think people do feel safe in parts of this city and other cities around the country. I think there's a real issue with antisocial behaviour, with drug abuse, and with, what might be described as lower level aggression, notwithstanding, of course, the horrific stabbings that take place. But it is worth saying again that crime overall has fallen in this country.
Yes, Yes, I have read that, but I find it hard to believe that that's accurate, because when I was growing up in the 50s and in the 60s, and certainly in London, London in the 60s, you used to come home at all times of the day and night, and I didn't feel sort of as threatened as I do now. Okay, I'm old, maybe I feel more vulnerable.
I wonder. Well, do you know what, Joe? It's a really interesting point, because I wonder whether actually the feeling of safety has changed because of the antisocial, lower level criminal activity or otherwise that is taking place.
Yeah, yes, you could be right. And if I might just mention,
but I don't know that the death penalty changes that. But go on, Joe. Finally, yeah.
Just to say, I do think that LBC should have a wider range of presenters, because I used to listen to it when people like Mike Dickin were on, who was, I would say, slightly more to the right than you seem to be. But I don't listen to LBC very much now, because it is just sort of the same old liberal, lefty, hand-wringing, we have to understand criminals and...
Joe, Joe, listen, I'm sorry that it's not entirely an echo chamber, but I would cast aspersions on the left-wing hand-wringing thing. There's no reason why you should know, but I did used to work for the Conservative Party. I'm not sure that they are a left-wing hand-wringing organisation, are they?
I wouldn't say so. I used to be in the Labour Party when I was a young woman. So
there you go. All right, here they come. Here we go. Pot and kettle, Joe. Hey, thank you for the call. 0345 6060 973 1246.
Coming up at 1, Majid Nawaz, leading Britain's conversation. Next on LBC.
technology.
Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster on LBC.
Brett is in Perth. Tom, the death penalty has no place in modern society. What would have happened to the Guildford 4 and the Birmingham 6? Innocents would have been executed. Joe's in Glasgow. Tom, I'm very sorry, I have to disagree with your lady caller. The death penalty is not the answer and never could be. Lee's in Harlow in Essex. Tom, when I was in my teens, I would probably have voted for the death penalty, but I'm 63 now. I am very opposed. I would not trust DNA evidence if I found myself in the dock for a crime I had not committed. Liz is in Cricklade in Wiltshire. Hi there, Liz.
Hi, Tom. How you doing?
I'm very well. Your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm a bit perturbed by the sort of Victorian views that are coming out this morning, and feel quite upset about them. In 2007, my son was the victim of violent crime. He was hit on the head 7 times with a hammer. And I've been through an extensive court case and criminal justice system and got through the other side. And I think that really people need to hear more from victims who've been through what we've been through, because there is really... sending people to jail is not a solution, or the death penalty. Who takes a life? Who has the decision to take a life? That is not the case. What we need to do is put more effort into preventing crime, and that's to do with making sure that education is good and the funding is there to help people with mental illnesses and all of those sorts of things. And I mean, I know the last caller would call it liberal hand-wringing. Well, I can assure you it's not hand-wringing from my point of view. It certainly is liberal, because we need to have a society which is fair and balanced and safe. And the death penalty, for certain, is... I'm sure reading about it in the papers when you're infuriated by a terrible crime, that you immediately jump to, I just want to get rid of that person and obliterate them. Well, it really isn't that simple. And we have got fantastic experts. Our judicial system is clogged right now, but they are experts. And we've got experts who are fantastic at restorative justice. I have sat with the people that attacked my son, and we have made amends. And those people have been free to get on with their lives.
Liz,
and that gives me more peace of mind than anything else, because it's a solution. And these are the stories you need to hear about, because people make mistakes.
What were they sentenced to?
And they can learn from this. The main one with a hammer was sentenced to 8 years. Right. He served 5.
Right. And do you mind me asking what happened to your son?
My son had 7 blows to his head on the hammer, 3 skull fractures. One was depressed by an inch into his brain, so he had to have brain surgery to repair that damage. But obviously, because it's into the brain, it doesn't ever heal, so he has a permanent brain injury.
Gosh.
So it's with us forever. I mean, you don't get any peace from a crime like this, and I did not get any peace from seeing the protagonist go through the justice system and seeing them handcuffed and taken up off to jail. It's not. It's a very unpleasant experience, all in all, and it doesn't.
And when you sat down with them, did you? What was the purpose of doing that? To ask them yourself why they did it, or to hear some answers, or see some remorse?
I think just to say that, from my perspective, it was to say they've served their punishment, and they are wanting to get on. The fact that they wanted to speak to me, that they wanted to get on and start afresh and not do that again, and be a good member of society. And that is exactly what's happened. I know one of them has gone on to have a young family, and I really hope that every time he cuddles his baby, that he thinks about that what happened to my son happened to his child, because it is horrific. But those lessons need to be learned from, our local services, our education. All of these things need to be put into making life better. And also, your lady who said that things were better years ago, it's absolute nonsense. I mean, we had Christie during the war who murdered a load of women. It's just that the news now is so inflammatory, it's there within seconds. Years ago, we didn't have news 24/7.
Do you know, Liz, I have to say I admire you enormously, because I think if if that happened to any of my children, I'm not sure I would be as forgiving or as calm, actually, as you seem to be.
Tom, I've had a long time to go through this, and in the early stages, of course, you have all sorts of irrational thoughts. But having gone through this lengthy process, which it is incredibly lengthy, the criminal justice system, and it's scary and stressful, that I really can speak from a position of knowledge and experience and say that, I think a lot can be done. I think people should be focused on how can we make less crime rather than thinking, let's lock them all up and kill them all. I mean, it's just not, it's a quick, sure solution for someone who's never been involved in it. And I'm really grateful to say that I am in the minority. There's not many people that go through what my family have been through. Probably more people win the lottery than going through what we've been through. So ultimately, that's what people need to think about. If you're exercised by violent crime, then go out and get stuck into society and do some good. Instead of thinking, let's just kill them all. I mean, it's a very hard view. And it's pretty dangerous, really. Where is humanity if you think you want to go and you've got the right, you've got the voice to enforce a death penalty for anyone who does
Liz,
something
I
wrong?
think, as I say, I admire you enormously. Horrific what you and your family and your son have been through. And I guess actually both your position and those who say, the hang and flog 'em brigade, come at it. Ultimately, the conclusion is the same in that they want much less violent crime. It's just the methods are radically different. Thank you so much for your call. Emily's a new caller in Brent. Hi there, Emily.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm so happy and it's so refreshing and positive to hear what Liz is saying despite what her family's been through. I'm a secondary school teacher at a very deprived school actually in Westminster, and I just want people to, all of your callers around this subject so far I believe have been white females, and I want everyone
we don't know that. Hang on,
we
Emily,
don't know that.
We don't know.
Okay, no, but the majority of people in this country have the privilege of having white skin, and I want everyone to realise that our justice system and our police system is not colourblind, and that as a young white female myself, I really like to remember and check my privilege every day when I'm teaching, when I'm going about my daily life, and to remember that the justice and police system in this country unfairly marginalises BAME individuals.
I have to say, Emily, I am. And people might think I'm being a bit snowflake about this, but I'm a tad uncomfortable at the idea of telling people just because they are white that they are more privileged. I mean, tell that to the kids who were killed in this fire.
And I completely understand that, but I'm saying in day-to-day life, everybody has white privilege because of the colour of their skin. They are born with an inherent privilege that means that statistically, in their day-to-day life, they are afforded more privilege because of the colour of their skin. And this is shown in statistics all throughout society.
Well,
and in terms of the death penalty, like this, what I'm trying to get across to people is that that because our justice system isn't colourblind, we like the Liz was saying, we aren't the ones who can enforce who deserves to live or die. The justice system has to be about rehabilitation. And
it does. Well, listen, Emily, it does have to be about rehabilitation. People want to see much less crime. People don't want to see people come in and out of prison and commit crimes all the time. But there also has to be an element of punishment. And people worry, and I think not unfairly, that punishment has sort of slipped down the line a bit. Thank you for your call. Thank you for all your calls during the course of the programme. We are back with you next Sunday at 10 a.m. I'm with you from Monday night at 10 p.m. for the late night show with Tom Swarbrick. Do join me then if you can. Global Player has everything you need. It is, of course, there for you for free. At 4, it's Ian Payne. Next on LBC, Majid Nawaz.
Thank you, Tom. Coming up, British ISIS terrorist Asil Muthana broke his cover in Syria and said, "I deserve to come home." So what should be done about our foreign jihadists who are British citizens? Before that, Michael Zeckler, a black music producer, was brutally beaten by 3 now suspended policemen who allegedly called him a dirty N-word for not wearing a mask in Paris. Yesterday, an elderly man was seen on video being led away by Met Police for standing alone